This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I don't normally post stuff like this online, but I've been carrying this around for too long. It's been nearly 20 years, and I still can't shake what happened that summer. I was 13, staying at my grandmother's property in rural Kentucky for 2 weeks like I did every summer. The place was nothing special, just a modest farmhouse on about 15 acres, mostly woods with some cleared areas. My cousin Drew, who's a year older than me, always came to stay during the same time. We were close as kids, but after what happened, something changed between us. We never really talked about it again. It was late July, hot as hell. I remember because the sweat would drip down your back, even in the shade. Grandma's place didn't have air conditioning, just ceiling fans that pushed the hot air around. That particular day had been brutal, easily in the 90s with humidity that made it hard to breathe. We'd spent most of the afternoon inside playing cards and complaining about the heat, but by early evening, when things finally cooled down a bit, we were desperate to get outside. Behind my grandmother's property ran this old dirt trail. It wasn't really a road, more like an overgrown access path that the power company used to check lines or something. It cut through the woods for about half a mile before connecting to the neighbor's property. The trail had a pretty decent slope on one end, and Drew and I had discovered it made for an awesome bike run. We'd take turns riding our bikes to the top of the trail where it started near a clearing, then bomb down the hill as fast as we could, seeing who could get the furthest without having to pedal. It wasn't exactly safe. There were rocks and tree roots that could send you flying if you weren't careful, but that was part of the thrill. That evening we grabbed our bikes from the shed and headed out there around 7. The sun was still up but starting to sink, casting those long shadows through the trees. I remember how the trail looked especially creepy that evening. The way the light filtered through the leaves created these weird, shifting patterns on the ground. But we were 13 and 14, so of course we ignored the eerie feeling and focused on our competition instead. Drew went first. I watched him speed down the trail, dust kicking up behind his wheels. He made it almost to the bottom before having to pedal. Then it was my turn. I remember feeling so amped up, determined to beat him. I positioned my bike at the top of the trail, took a deep breath, and pushed off. The initial rush was incredible, wind in my hair, the bumps in the dirt making my handlebars shake, that weightless feeling in my stomach. I was picking up serious speed. About halfway down, I realized I was going faster than I ever had before. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was another kid on the trail. From a distance, it looked like a child on one of those little toy vehicles, those plastic cars little kids pedal around in. It seemed to be coming up the trail toward me. My first thought was honestly just annoyance. This trail was our spot, and I didn't want some random kid getting in the way of our bike runs. But as I got closer, something felt off. The way it was moving didn't look right. It was sort of jerky, not smooth like someone pedaling. And its face. I couldn't make out features from that distance, but I could see it had this wide grin. Too wide, like unnaturally wide. I started to brake, dragging my feet in the dirt to slow down. I didn't want to crash into whatever this was. As my bike slowed and the distance between us closed, I got a better look. It wasn't a kid. It was the size of a kid, maybe 8 or 9 years old, but something was seriously wrong. Its skin looked grayish, not like any normal skin tone. And that grin, Jesus. That grin was stretched from ear to ear, showing teeth that didn't look right. They were too uniform, too white, almost like a cartoon character's teeth, but three-dimensional and real. Its eyes were wide open and way too alert, fixated on me with an intensity that made my stomach drop. I came to a complete stop about 15 feet away from it. We just stared at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably only seconds. I couldn't speak. My throat had closed up. The thing was sitting on what looked like a toy vehicle, but it was odd, like a hybrid between a big wheel and something I couldn't identify. The wheels were too thin, almost like bicycle wheels, but smaller. Then it started moving again, but not up or down the trail. It began circling me, slowly at first, then faster, kicking up dirt with its wheels. It never took its eyes off me, and that grin never faltered. It didn't blink. Not once. I remember the sound of those wheels on the dirt, a soft crunching that somehow seemed louder than it should have been. Everything else in the woods had gone silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just the sound of those wheels and my own heartbeat hammering in my ears. I was frozen. I couldn't get back on my bike. I couldn't run. I just stood there, clutching my handlebars, watching this thing circle me like a shark. "Jacob!" Drew's voice broke the spell. He was pedaling up the trail, probably wondering what was taking me so long. The thing stopped circling when it heard Drew's voice. It just stopped, completely still, but its head turned toward the sound with this unnatural slowness, like it was mechanical. The body stayed perfectly still while the head rotated. Drew pulled up beside me, breathing hard from pedaling uphill. "Dude, what are you?" he started, then saw what I was looking at. "What the fuck is that?" he whispered. Knowing Drew could see it too somehow made it worse. It wasn't my imagination. This thing was real. It stared at us both, that grin still plastered on its face. Then, without any warning, it shot off into the woods. Not down the trail, but straight through the underbrush. It moved impossibly fast, like someone had hit fast forward on a video. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone, disappearing into the trees. But the last thing I saw, the thing that still shows up in my nightmares, was it turning its head back toward us as it went. That grin still firmly in place, eyes still locked on us, even as it moved in another direction. We stood there in shock for a moment, then both jumped on our bikes and pedaled back to my grandmother's house like our lives depended on it. I remember the burn in my legs, the rasp of my breathing, the terror that if I looked back, I'd see that thing chasing us with that unnatural speed. We burst into the kitchen, where my grandma was making dinner. She took one look at our faces and asked what was wrong. Drew and I looked at each other, and in that moment, I knew we were thinking the same thing. We couldn't tell her. Who would believe us? "Nothing," I said, "just racing too hard." We didn't go outside again that night. We sat in front of the TV, barely watching whatever was on, jumping at every sound from outside. Neither of us brought up what we'd seen. It was like if we talked about it, we'd make it more real somehow. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing that grin, those two perfect teeth, those unblinking eyes. I kept hearing the crunch of those weird wheels on dirt. Every shadow in my room seemed to move, and every creak of the old farmhouse had me pulling the covers over my head. The next morning, Drew and I finally talked about it. We were sitting on the front porch, both exhausted from a sleepless night. "What do you think it was?" I asked him. Drew shook his head. "I don't know, man. Maybe it was just some weird kid playing a prank," but his voice didn't have any conviction. We both knew what we'd seen wasn't human. No human can move that fast. No human has a smile that wide or eyes that never blink. "Should we tell someone?" I suggested. "Who? Grandma? Your parents? They'll think we made it up or we're seeing things." He was right. We were just kids. No one would believe us. We avoided the dirt trail for the rest of our stay, sticking close to the house. Every time we went outside, I felt like we were being watched. I'd catch movement from the corner of my eye, only to turn and find nothing there. The woods beyond my grandmother's property, which had always seemed so inviting and full of adventure, now looked sinister and forbidding. On our last night at Grandma's, I woke up around 3 in the morning. Something had pulled me from sleep. A noise, or maybe just that feeling you get when you're not alone. My bedroom window faced the woods, and as I lay there in the dark, I saw something move at the edge of the tree line. A small figure, standing perfectly still. Even from that distance in the darkness, I could make out that unnatural grin, gleaming white in the moonlight. I shut my eyes tight and pulled the covers over my head, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. When I finally gathered the courage to look again, maybe 10 minutes later, it was gone. But I didn't sleep another minute that night. We left the next day. I never told my parents what happened. Drew and I barely spoke about it during the drive home. By the time school started that fall, it was like an unspoken agreement had formed between us. We wouldn't talk about it ever again, but I could tell it had affected Drew as much as it had me. There was a new caution to him, a wariness that hadn't been there before. Over the years, I've tried to rationalize what we saw. Maybe it was just another kid playing a weird prank. Maybe the speed at which it disappeared was just our frightened minds playing tricks on us. But deep down, I know better. Whatever we encountered on that dirt trail wasn't human. I've gone back to my grandmother's property many times since then. She passed away 5 years ago, but my parents kept the place as a vacation home. The dirt trail is still there, though it's even more overgrown now. Every time I visit, I feel a crawling sensation on the back of my neck when I look toward those woods. I've never gone down that trail again. Not once in 20 years. Drew and I don't talk about it, but I know he remembers. Whenever we're at the property together and someone suggests a walk in the woods, his eyes flick to mine for just a second, and I can see it there. The memory, the fear. Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder if that thing is still out there, circling the dirt trail on its strange wheels, waiting for someone else to come racing down the hill. I wonder if other kids have seen it over the years. I wonder if it's watching me right now, that unchanging grin fixed on its face. The rational part of my brain says it was just a weird encounter, something I've built up in my memory over time. But when I'm alone in the dark, when the house settles and creaks, I know better. Something inhuman was watching us from those woods. Something that looked like a child but wasn't. And the thought that it might still be there, that I might turn around one day and see that unnatural grin emerging from the trees, still makes me walk a little faster when I'm alone. I've never felt comfortable sharing this before, but I needed to get it out. Even typing this has my hands shaking. That day changed something in me. It opened my eyes to the possibility that there are things in this world that don't fit neatly into what we think we know. Things with two wide grins and wheels that crunch softly on dirt trails on hot summer evenings. Story 2. I never believed in ghosts or anything paranormal until last year. I'm still trying to make sense of what happened. Sorry if this is all over the place. I'm typing this at 3 in the morning because I can't sleep again. We moved into our suburban home in October last year. Nothing special, just your typical American neighborhood with perfectly mowed lawns and families who wave at each other from their driveways. My parents were excited about the move. Good school district, nice neighbors, all that stuff. I was just annoyed about leaving my friends behind. Typical 17-year-old problems, I guess. The house itself was pretty normal. 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a basement that smelled like old carpet. Nothing that would make you think this place is definitely haunted. No creepy history that the realtor conveniently forgot to mention. Just a regular house built in the 90s that needed some updating. The first few months were fine. I was busy with school, trying to make new friends, and getting used to my new room. It was smaller than my old one, but it had this cool window seat where I could read or just stare out at the backyard. My 2 dogs, Buddy and Max, seemed to like the place too. They had more space to run around, and our backyard was fully fenced. It was around February when I first noticed something off. I was up late studying for a chemistry test when I heard what sounded like whispering coming from the hallway. I thought it was my parents talking, but when I peeked out, the hallway was empty and their bedroom door was closed. I brushed it off as the house settling, or maybe the heating system making weird noises. But then it happened again and again, always at night, always when I was alone. Whispers that I could never quite make out, like someone was having a conversation just quiet enough that I couldn't understand the words. Then came the shadows in the shower. I know how that sounds, but I swear I'm not making this up. I'd be washing my hair, eyes closed with shampoo, and when I'd open them, I'd catch a glimpse of something dark moving behind the shower curtain. Just for a split second. Never long enough for me to be sure of what I saw, but enough to make me rush through my showers and sometimes skip washing my hair altogether. My parents didn't notice anything, or if they did, they didn't say anything. Maybe they thought I was just being dramatic. I started keeping my bedroom door open at night because closing it made me feel trapped, like something was in there with me. By June, things got worse. My phone would randomly turn off even with a full battery. My laptop would open programs I never clicked on. The TV in my room would change channels on its own. Small things that could be explained away by technology glitches, but they kept happening too often to be coincidences. Then last month, everything escalated. My parents have this rule that I can't have my phone in my room after midnight on school nights. Super annoying, but whatever. So yesterday night, I went downstairs to put my phone on the charging station in the living room. It was exactly midnight. I remember checking the time before setting my phone down. As I was heading back upstairs, I glanced at my bedroom door at the end of the hallway. It was open about halfway, just like I'd left it. But as I watched, it moved. Not like someone pushed it, but like it was breathing. It swung open a few inches, then drifted back to where it had been. I stood frozen at the top of the stairs, my heart racing. I told myself it was just a draft. We keep the AC pretty high in summer. I needed to take my allergy medicine, so I went to the kitchen first, thinking the weird door movement would stop by the time I got back. The kitchen was dark except for the little light above the stove. I grabbed my medicine from the cabinet and swallowed it with some water from the tap. The house was completely silent, not even the usual creaks and settling noises. When I came back to the hallway, my bedroom door was shut, completely shut. It had never done that before. We have uneven floors in this old house, and my door always swings open unless it's latched. It literally cannot close on its own. I stood there for what felt like forever, just staring at my closed door. I felt cold all over, like someone had dumped ice water down my back. I almost called out for my parents, but I didn't want to wake them up over what was probably nothing. Plus, I didn't want them to think I was freaking out over nothing. Finally, I made myself walk down the hallway. The floor creaked under my feet, each step sounding impossibly loud in the quiet house. When I reached my door, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. I don't know what I expected to find inside. A burglar, a ghost, nothing at all. I pushed the door open quickly, flipping on my light switch as I did. The room looked normal. My unmade bed, clothes on the floor, textbooks on my desk. Then my TV turned on by itself, not just on. It flipped to a static channel with that awful white noise sound. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I ran over and hit the power button, but it wouldn't turn off. I had to unplug it from the wall. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip the cord. When I finally got it unplugged, the silence felt even worse somehow. I stood there trying to calm down, telling myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe the remote was stuck under something on my bed. Maybe the TV was glitching. But I knew, deep down, I knew something was wrong with this house. Or maybe something was wrong with me. Was I losing it? I was too scared to sleep alone, so I called for Buddy, our golden retriever. He's usually not allowed on the beds, but my parents were asleep, and I needed someone with me. He came trotting in and jumped up beside me. Having him there made me feel a little better. Then I realized I'd left my water bottle in the kitchen. I needed it to take another allergy pill before bed. I have pretty bad allergies in summer. I didn't want to go back downstairs alone, but I really needed that medicine. When I got up, Max, our other dog, a German Shepherd mix, ran into my room too. I figured having both dogs in my room might be even better protection, so I tried to get him to stay on my bed while I went down to the kitchen. But when I came back up with my water bottle, Max had run out of my room. He was standing in the hallway about 10 feet from my door, and he was... God, I get chills just thinking about it. He was growling. His fur along his spine was standing straight up, and he was staring at my bedroom door like he could see something I couldn't. I tried to coax him back, calling his name softly so I wouldn't wake my parents. He wouldn't budge. He just kept growling, this low, threatening sound I'd never heard him make before. Then it happened. In the living room downstairs, there was a loud noise, like someone had violently yanked a cord from the wall. Max took off running down the stairs and straight to his dog bed in the corner of the living room, where he curled up in a tight ball. I ran back to my room, slammed the door shut, and jumped into bed. Buddy was still there, thank God. He did something he's never done before. He climbed right on top of me, resting his head and front paws on my chest, like he was protecting me. He stayed like that the entire night, not moving once. I barely slept. The next few weeks were a nightmare. Things would move when I wasn't looking. My hairbrush would be on my desk when I swear I left it in the bathroom. My backpack would be unzipped and my books scattered when I came home from school. The worst part was how I started to feel. I've always been pretty chill, but I started getting these intense mood swings. I'd be fine one minute and then filled with this unexplainable rage the next. I got into a fight with my best friend over something stupid. I don't even remember what, and I said horrible things I didn't mean. I shoved my little brother when he came into my room without knocking. I've never been violent before. Never. My mom noticed and asked if I was feeling okay. I wanted to tell her everything. But how do you tell your parents you think your house is haunted without sounding completely insane? So I blamed it on stress from school and hormones. She seemed to buy it, but I could tell she was worried. Then the voices started getting clearer. Sometimes at night, I'd hear my mom calling my name from downstairs, but when I'd go check, she'd be fast asleep in her room. Once, I heard my dad asking me to come help him in the garage. But when I went out there, the garage was empty and his car was gone. He was still at work. Whatever was in our house was mimicking them, trying to trick me. Last week I was sitting at my desk doing homework when a framed picture flew off my wall. Not fell, flew. It had been hanging securely since we moved in, and it suddenly launched itself across the room, missing my head by inches before smashing against my dresser. The glass shattered everywhere. My mom came running when she heard the crash. I told her it must have been loose, but I know what I saw. That picture was aimed at me. I'm convinced now that whatever is in this house is targeting me specifically. Maybe it's trying to scare me away, or maybe it's trying to attach itself to me. I've read online that negative entities sometimes try to weaken you emotionally so they can get a stronger foothold. I don't know what to do. I've started sleeping with all the lights on. I keep Buddy with me as much as possible. Max won't come near my room anymore. He gets to the hallway and just stops, like there's an invisible wall he can't cross. My parents think I'm going through some kind of phase. They've even talked about taking me to a therapist. Maybe I should go. Either I'm being haunted or I'm losing my mind. And honestly, I'm not sure which would be worse. The thing that scares me most is that it seems to be getting stronger. What starts with whispers and shadows? Where does it end? I'm afraid to find out. I don't know if anyone will believe this. I barely believe it myself sometimes, but I know what I've experienced. Something is in this house, and it doesn't want me here. Story 3. I've never been someone who believed in ghosts or anything supernatural. I'm pretty logical, honestly. But what happened to me last year in that barn apartment has messed with my head in ways I still can't fully explain. I moved to this tiny town in upstate New York after breaking up with my boyfriend of 3 years. I needed someplace cheap and available immediately, and this converted barn apartment was perfect. The owner, this older guy named Frank, seemed decent enough. He told me the barn hadn't housed animals in decades while showing me around. The main house was about 50 yards away, where he lived with his wife. The apartment was different. It had these slanted ceilings that followed the roofline with exposed wooden beams everywhere. Despite what Frank said about no animals being there for ages, you could still smell hay and that damp wood scent that old barns have. I actually liked it at first. It felt cozy and rustic. My bedroom was in what used to be the hayloft. There was this railing along one side that overlooked the main living area below. The whole place was basically one big open space with a makeshift kitchen and bathroom added in. The floors creaked with every step, and sometimes I swear I could feel the whole structure sway slightly on windy nights. I'd been dealing with anxiety since the breakup, so every night before bed I'd pull up these breathing exercises on YouTube. Nothing fancy, just guided meditation stuff to help me calm down and actually fall asleep instead of replaying every conversation in my head until 3 in the morning. The first month was completely normal. I was settling in, getting used to the quiet after living in the city. Daisy, my beagle, seemed to love having all this space to sniff around. She's always been pretty chill, not much of a barker, which was why I got her in the first place. It was probably around week 5 when I first noticed something off. I was doing my breathing exercises one night, lying in bed with just my bedside lamp on. The app was telling me to visualize the breath entering your lungs or whatever, and I had my eyes closed. When I opened them, I caught what looked like a quick movement along the ceiling. Just this tall, dark shape that seemed to glide across the slanted part above my bed. I shot up, heart pounding, but nothing was there. I told myself it was just shadows from the poor wiring. The electricity in that place was sketchy at best. Lights would flicker if I ran the microwave and toaster at the same time. Classic old building problems, so I ignored it. But then it happened again the next night, and the night after that, always the same thing. I'd be doing my breathing exercises, eyes closed, and when I'd open them, I'd catch this movement in my peripheral vision, always along the ceiling, always tall and dark, always gone when I'd turn to look directly at it. I started leaving more lights on, thinking maybe the shadows were playing tricks on me. I even asked Frank if there might be bats or something in the roof space. He laughed it off, saying the place had been fully renovated and there was no way for animals to get in. It's just an old building settling, he said. They make all kinds of noises, but it wasn't noise that was bothering me. It was what I was seeing. About 2 months in, things escalated. I woke up around 3 in the morning, no idea why, just that sudden jolt awake that happens sometimes. The room was dark except for this small nightlight I'd started keeping plugged in. Yeah, I was getting that freaked out. I was lying there trying to fall back asleep when I noticed something by the loft railing. It looked like fog, but inside the apartment. This dark, cloudy patch that was just hovering there. It seemed more substantial where the hook was that I used to hang my ex's old jacket before I finally packed it away. I stared at it, completely frozen. This wasn't a shadow or something I caught in my peripheral vision. This was right in front of me, and it wasn't disappearing when I looked directly at it. It just hung there for maybe 30 seconds before it seemed to dissolve. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I told myself it was just my eyes adjusting to the dark, maybe some weird effect from the nightlight, anything rational I could think of. The truly unsettling part started when Daisy began reacting to it too. She'd never been a particularly alert dog. Half the time I was convinced she was partly deaf because she'd sleep through thunderstorms, delivery people knocking, everything. But one night while I was doing my breathing exercises, she suddenly lifted her head from her dog bed in the corner. Her ears perked up and her eyes were tracking something across the ceiling, following the exact path where I'd been seeing the movements. Then she started whining, not barking, not growling, just this anxious, high-pitched whine I'd never heard her make before. Her eyes followed something I couldn't see, moving from the ceiling down the wall, across the floor, and toward the loft railing. "Daisy?" I whispered, and she looked at me briefly before her attention snapped back to whatever invisible thing she was watching. That night, I slept with all the lights on and Daisy on the bed with me. Things fell into a pattern after that. Most incidents happened either when I was doing my breathing exercises or when I'd suddenly wake up around 3 in the morning. My heart would immediately start racing because I just knew, that I was about to see something again. Sometimes it was the movement along the ceiling. Sometimes it was that foggy patch by the railing. Once I woke up to find what looked like a tall shadow standing at the foot of my bed, just standing there. No features, no movement, just this dark silhouette that was definitely not caused by anything in my room. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I just lay there paralyzed as this thing stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then it just wasn't there anymore, like someone had turned off a projector. After that night, I started spending more time at a friend's place in town. I made excuses about the heating being bad in the barn, which wasn't entirely a lie. It was drafty as hell, but really, I was just terrified of being there after dark. I'd go back only to sleep, and even then, I'd delay as much as possible. I'd pull up in my car and sit there, staring at the barn, trying to work up the courage to go inside. Once, I swear I saw that same shadow move past the upstairs window while I was still outside. There's no way anyone was in my apartment. I always locked up carefully. I tried sage, I tried prayers, I tried telling whatever it was to leave me alone. Nothing worked, and nobody believed me. My friends thought I was just stressed about money and the breakup. Frank thought I was making excuses to try to get out of my lease early. The only one who seemed to understand was Daisy. She started refusing to go upstairs to the loft area. She'd plant her paws at the bottom of the stairs and wouldn't budge, not even for treats. I ended up carrying her up every night, and she'd immediately jump on the bed and press herself against me, her eyes constantly darting to the corners of the room. One night stands out more than the others. It was about 5 months into my lease, midwinter, with snow piled up outside. The wind was howling, making the whole barn creak and groan. I'd given up on the breathing exercises by then. They seemed to trigger whatever was happening. I woke up at exactly 3:02 according to my phone. Daisy was growling, not whining, but actually growling, something she never did. The temperature in the room had dropped dramatically. I could see my breath forming little clouds in front of my face. That's when I saw it, more clearly than ever before. The fog-like substance by the railing was taking shape. It was still mostly formless, but there was something intentional about it, like it was trying to become something specific. And then I heard it. Not with my ears exactly, but somehow in my head, a sound like breathing, but wrong somehow, wet and raspy and definitely not human. Daisy went absolutely ballistic. She leaped off the bed and started barking and growling at the shape, hair standing up along her spine. I'd never seen her like that before. The shape seemed to recoil from her reaction. It retreated toward the ceiling, spreading out thin like smoke before disappearing altogether. The temperature in the room returned to normal almost immediately. I slept in my car that night, with Daisy in the passenger seat. The next day, I started looking for a new place. I didn't care about breaking my lease or losing my security deposit. I just needed to get out. It took me another month to find somewhere I could afford. During that time, the incidents continued, always following the same pattern, always starting when I was half asleep or just waking up, always around the same areas of the apartment, always causing Daisy to react. On my last night there, after I'd packed everything into boxes and was sleeping on just a mattress on the floor, I woke up at, you guessed it, 3 in the morning. But this time, it wasn't just movement or a shape. The fog was back, and it was more defined than ever. It hovered at the foot of my mattress, and I swear it was looking at me. I couldn't see eyes or a face, but I just knew it was watching. Daisy was pressed against my side, trembling but not making a sound. "I'm leaving tomorrow," I said out loud, feeling ridiculous but desperate. "This place is yours again." The shape seemed to pulse once, getting slightly larger, then smaller, before dissolving away. I didn't sleep again that night. I've been in my new apartment for almost 6 months now. It's smaller, more expensive, and in a less convenient location. But nothing weird has happened here. No shadows, no movements, no fog. Daisy is back to her normal, oblivious self. Sometimes I try to rationalize what happened in that barn apartment. Maybe it was stress from the breakup. Maybe there was some kind of mold or dust that affected my perception. Maybe the old wiring was causing electrical fields that messed with my brain. But none of that explains why Daisy saw it too. None of that explains why it always happened in the same places at the same times. I drove past the barn last week. There's a new tenant already, some guy with out-of-state plates on his car. I thought about stopping, about warning him, but what would I even say? "Hey, stranger, your new place is haunted by a shadow that likes to watch you sleep." So I kept driving. But I wonder about him sometimes. I wonder if he's doing breathing exercises before bed. I wonder if he's waking up at 3 in the morning with his heart racing. I wonder if whatever was in that barn apartment has found a new person to visit. All I know for sure is that something was there, something that didn't want me there, something that stayed behind when I left. And no matter how hard I try to explain it away, I know what I saw, I know what I felt, and I'm never going back to find out what it was. Story 4. I never believed in the supernatural before we moved to Ridgepoint. I was the person who rolled my eyes at ghost stories and paranormal shows, but after what happened in that apartment, I don't know what to believe anymore. My husband Jason, our 4-year-old son Ethan and I moved into the Oakwood apartments in Ridgepoint about 2 months ago. Jason got a promotion that required relocation, and we found this place that seemed perfect. Newly renovated, quiet neighborhood, good schools nearby. The rent was surprisingly affordable for such a nice place, which should have been my first red flag. The weird stuff started almost immediately. The first week I began having these awful dreams where Jason was looking at me with pure hatred. In these dreams, he'd be standing over me while I slept, just staring. Sometimes he'd whisper things I couldn't quite make out. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, heart racing, only to find him sleeping peacefully beside me. I didn't mention these dreams to Jason. They seemed so silly in the daylight. Then I noticed the scratches. At first, they were just small marks on my forearms. Nothing major, the kind you might get from catching yourself on something without noticing. I figured I was scratching myself in my sleep, maybe because of stress from the move or the weird dreams. I even started wearing long-sleeved pajamas and cutting my nails super short, thinking that would solve the problem. It didn't. Last Tuesday night is when things got really messed up. I was standing next to Jason's gaming desk while he was playing some online game with his buddies. I was wearing just a t-shirt and underwear, typical loungewear for a warm spring evening at home. Ethan was already asleep in his room. I felt this sudden burning sensation on my upper thigh. It wasn't painful enough to make me cry out, more like when you get a paper cut and don't notice until it starts to sting. I reached down to touch my leg and felt wetness. When I looked at my fingers, there was blood. "Jason," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Something just scratched me." He paused his game and turned around. "What?" I showed him the scratch. It was about 4 inches long, starting on my upper thigh and curving slightly under my buttock. "There's no way I could have done that to myself, especially not without noticing." "You probably caught it on the edge of the desk," he said, barely looking before turning back to his game. "Put some Neosporin on it." I was about to argue when I felt another burning sensation, this time on the back of my other thigh. Right then and there, as Jason was still facing his computer screen, I watched a new scratch appear on my skin. It literally formed before my eyes. The skin just split open in a thin line, beading with tiny droplets of blood. "Jason!" This time I couldn't keep the panic from my voice. "Look at this. It's happening right now." He turned around again, annoyed at first, but his expression changed when he saw the fresh scratch. "What the hell?" "I don't know. I was freaking out. It just happened. I was standing right here." He examined both scratches, then checked the desk for any sharp edges, but there was nothing. He even ran his hands along the walls, the door frame, everything within reach. "Maybe it's some kind of allergic reaction," he suggested, but his voice had that tone people use when they know they're reaching. We cleaned and bandaged the scratches, and I tried to convince myself it was some bizarre coincidence. Maybe I'd brushed against something sharp without realizing it. Maybe the stress of the move was making me hyper-aware of minor injuries. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like something was watching me. Around 3 in the morning, I got up to use the bathroom. As I was washing my hands, I glanced up at the mirror and saw a dark figure standing in the doorway behind me. It wasn't Jason. It wasn't Ethan. It was tall and solid black, like a shadow, but three-dimensional. I couldn't make out any features. It was just this human-shaped darkness. I spun around with a gasp, but the doorway was empty. I rushed back to bed, woke Jason up, and told him what I'd seen. He checked the apartment thoroughly, but found nothing. He tried to calm me down, suggesting it was just my eyes playing tricks on me in the dark, but I knew what I'd seen. The next day, after Jason left for work and Ethan was at daycare, I went to talk to our building's resident advisor, Mrs. Chen. She's this sweet older lady who's lived in the building for like 20 years. When I told her what was happening, I expected her to think I was crazy. Instead, she got really quiet, then went to her bookshelf and pulled out a Bible. She pressed it into my hands and said, "Keep this close to you, especially at night." "Has something like this happened before?" I asked her. She hesitated. "This building has history, not all of it good." That was all she would say. She practically pushed me out of her apartment after that. I'm not religious, but I took the Bible home anyway. That night I put it on my nightstand. Around 2 in the morning I woke up to that same burning sensation, this time on my stomach, 3 fresh scratches like claw marks. The Bible hadn't helped at all. The next few days were a blur of fear and confusion. I started seeing that dark figure more frequently, always in doorways, always just for a split second. The scratches kept appearing, sometimes while I was alone, sometimes while Jason was right there with me. They would just appear on my skin out of nowhere. Jason was starting to get freaked out too. He suggested we see a doctor, thinking maybe I had some rare condition causing my skin to split open. The doctor found nothing wrong with me physically, but recommended a psychiatrist. She thought I might be harming myself due to stress and not remembering it, a form of dissociation. I knew I wasn't doing this to myself. The breaking point came 5 nights ago. I was sitting at my small desk in our bedroom, trying to distract myself by paying bills online. Jason was giving Ethan his bath. I had my hair up in a messy bun, and suddenly I felt fingers, actual fingers, brushing against the back of my neck. I jumped up and spun around, but no one was there. Then the pen on my desk moved. It just rolled across the surface on its own, dropped off the edge, and bounced across the floor. I watched, frozen, as my stapler slid about 2 inches to the left. Then my notebook flipped open, the pages ruffling as if someone was thumbing through them. I bolted from the room, grabbed Ethan from the bath, despite his protests and Jason's confusion, and refused to go back into the apartment that night. We ended up sleeping on the couches in the lobby. The next morning, I confronted the building manager, Josh. There was always something off about him. The way he avoided eye contact, how he seemed to appear in hallways right when you were walking through. I demanded to know if there had been any incidents in our apartment before we moved in. "What kind of incidents?" he asked, looking nervous. "Anything unusual? Deaths, accidents, tenants complaining about strange occurrences?" He shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not at liberty to discuss previous tenants." "I have scratches appearing on my body out of nowhere," I said, pulling up my sleeve to show him the latest marks. "My things are moving by themselves. I see a dark figure in my apartment at night. I need to know what's going on." His face went pale when he saw the scratches. He muttered something about checking the records and practically ran back into his office. I never got a straight answer from him. But that afternoon, Mrs. Chen knocked on our door. She looked nervous, kept glancing down the hallway like she was afraid of being seen. "The woman who lived in your apartment before you," she whispered. "She left suddenly, in the middle of the night, left all her furniture behind." "Why?" I asked. She said she couldn't sleep, said she felt hands on her in the dark, and the scratches. Mrs. Chen's eyes flicked to my arms. She had them too. I felt sick. What happened to her? No one knows. She just disappeared. But before that, she was talking about a man who died here, back in the 80s. They found him in what's now your bathroom. Self-inflicted wounds, they said. But he'd been scratching at the walls, wrote things. She wouldn't tell me more, just warned me to be careful and left. That night, I refused to sleep in the bedroom. Jason thought I was overreacting, but he let me and Ethan take the couch while he slept in our bed. Around 4 in the morning, I woke up to find Ethan standing by the couch, staring toward the hallway that led to the bathroom. "The shadow man is in the bathroom again," he said in that matter-of-fact way kids have that makes everything 10 times creepier. I hadn't told Ethan anything about what I'd seen. I grabbed him, wrapped us both in a blanket, and sat there until dawn, too terrified to move. When Jason woke up, he had 3 long scratches down his back that hadn't been there when he went to sleep. We're staying at a hotel now. Jason finally believes me. We've given notice to break our lease, but we have to pay a huge penalty we can't really afford. Josh keeps insisting there's nothing wrong with the apartment, says we're just sensitive or imaginative, but the scratches haven't stopped. Even here at the hotel, they still appear. 3 days ago, one formed on my back while I was in the shower. Yesterday I found one on Ethan's ankle. Whatever this is, it followed us, and I don't know what to do. I can't sleep. I'm afraid to be alone. Every doorway, every dark corner makes my heart race. The worst part. Last night I had that dream again, Jason standing over me with hatred in his eyes, but when I woke up, he was standing at the foot of the bed, just staring at me. When I said his name, he blinked several times, looked confused, and asked why I was shouting. He doesn't remember getting out of bed. I'm typing this on my phone while Jason and Ethan are asleep. There's a scratch burning its way across my wrist right now. I can feel it happening, but I'm too afraid to look. Story 5. I still don't know what to think about what happened to me a few months ago. I've tried talking to a couple of friends about it, but they just laugh it off or tell me it was my imagination. I know what I heard, though. I know it. I moved to this small town last year after getting a job at the local hardware store. It's nothing fancy, just stocking shelves, helping customers find what they need, that kind of thing. The problem was that I got stuck with the night shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Not exactly prime time for socializing, but the pay was decent enough and the schedule actually worked for me since I've always been a bit of a night owl. Finding affordable housing was a nightmare until I stumbled across this apartment building that used to be an old YMCA from the 70s. The conversion wasn't exactly top-notch, but the rent was cheap and I was desperate. My apartment is actually what used to be some kind of office space on the second floor. They kept a lot of the original features of the building intact, the old locker room tiles in the hallway bathroom, the outdated wood paneling in some areas, and even this really creepy half-gutted basketball court on the first floor that they use for storage now. But the weirdest part of the building is definitely the pool area. It's this big space at the back of the building that's been locked up and basically abandoned since the conversion. There's a set of double doors with these rusty chains wrapped around the handles and a big padlock. I'd always assumed they drained the pool when they converted the building, because why wouldn't they? An unused pool is just a liability, right? For the first few months living there, I never gave much thought to the pool area. I would walk past those chained doors on my way to and from work, and that was it. But about 3 months after moving in, I was coming home from my shift around 7:30 in the morning, dead tired as usual, when I noticed something odd. There's this side entrance to the pool area, a single door next to the main double doors, and it was slightly ajar, just open, maybe an inch or two. I remember standing there staring at it for what felt like forever. I knew I should just keep walking, go upstairs to my apartment and crash. I had been on my feet all night and my bed was calling my name, but there was this weird pull of curiosity. In 3 months, I'd never seen inside the pool area, and now there was this opportunity just staring me in the face. I looked around, but nobody else was in the hallway. It was early morning on a weekday. Most of the other tenants were either still asleep or already gone for work. I pushed the door open just a little wider and peeked inside. It was dark, but not completely pitch black. There were these high windows along one wall that let in some of the early morning light, just enough that I could make out the general shape of things. Before I knew what I was doing, I'd slipped inside and let the door fall almost closed behind me, keeping it open just a crack so I wouldn't get locked in. The air was different in there, heavy with this musty chlorine smell that hadn't quite faded even after all these years. The ceiling was high with exposed pipes and beams, and the acoustics were strange, that hollow, echoey quality that indoor pools always have. And then I saw it, the pool itself. It wasn't drained like I'd assumed. It was about half full of water, dark and completely still, like glass, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. I could see some debris floating on the surface, leaves and dirt that had somehow made their way in from those high windows, I guess. The whole place had this abandoned feel to it that was both fascinating and deeply unsettling. The tile floor around the pool had these dark stains that I didn't want to think too much about. There were a few old plastic chairs stacked in one corner and what looked like some ancient pool equipment against the far wall. I walked slowly around the edge of the pool, my footsteps echoing loudly in the empty space. It felt wrong being in there, like I was trespassing, but I couldn't make myself leave yet. I kept thinking how weird it was that they'd just left the pool half filled like this. Wouldn't the water get gross? Wouldn't it be a breeding ground for mosquitoes and mold and who knows what else? After circling the pool once, I sat down on the edge, my legs dangling over the side, but not touching the water. I was exhausted from my shift and the cool tile felt nice. I just sat there for a few minutes, staring at the dark water, listening to the occasional drip from somewhere in the room and the distant hum of the building's HVAC system. That's when it happened. I heard the splash first, that distinct sound of a body entering water. Not a small splash like something falling in, but the unmistakable sound of someone diving into the pool. My head snapped up, looking across to the deep end where the diving board used to be. It had been removed, leaving just metal attachments sticking out of the concrete, but I couldn't see anyone. Then came the sound of swimming, rhythmic, steady strokes cutting through the water, the unmistakable pattern of someone doing laps. I could even hear the little gasps for air that swimmers make when they turn their heads to breathe. But the thing is, and I still get goosebumps thinking about this, I couldn't see anyone swimming. There was no body, no person in that pool, just these ripples moving across the surface, disturbing the previously still water, following the exact pattern you'd expect from someone swimming laps. I froze completely. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. All I could do was stare at those ripples moving back and forth across the pool, listening to the sounds of someone who wasn't there. This went on for what felt like forever, but was probably only about 2 minutes. The sounds of swimming, the water rippling in perfect sync with the strokes and kicks I could hear but couldn't see. And then, all at once, it stopped. The water went completely still again. The ripples flattened out within seconds, much faster than seemed natural, and the silence that fell over the room was so absolute it hurt my ears. I finally managed to move, slowly pulling my legs up from the edge of the pool and standing on shaky legs. I scanned the pool area, looking for wet footprints, for any sign that a real person had been in there with me. Nothing, just the same empty, half-decayed room. I backed away from the pool, never taking my eyes off that dark water. When I reached the door, I slipped out, pulling it firmly shut behind me. I even wrapped the chain back around the handles and clicked the padlock shut, though I have no idea if it actually locked or not. I practically ran up to my apartment, locked the door behind me, and sat on my bed shaking for almost an hour. I kept trying to come up with rational explanations. Maybe it was just the building's plumbing. Maybe I was so tired from my shift that my mind was playing tricks on me. Maybe someone was swimming in there and somehow got out without me seeing them, though that seemed impossible given where I was sitting. I didn't sleep well that day. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that swimming sound again. I kept seeing those ripples moving across the still dark water. A few days later, I ran into Mr. Jenkins in the hallway. He's this older guy who's lived in the building since before the conversion. He's always friendly, if a bit odd, and knows all the history of the place. I casually asked him about the pool, trying not to let on that I'd been in there. "Oh, the pool," he said, his face going strangely blank. "Nobody uses it now, not since that child drowned back in '83. My blood went cold. A child drowned in there? He nodded, like this was the most normal thing in the world. Young boy, maybe 10 or 11, snuck in after hours to swim alone, got caught in the drain somehow. Then he just shrugged and walked away, leaving me standing there in shock. I wanted to call after him, to ask more questions, but the words caught in my throat. I went back to my apartment and spent hours online trying to find any information about a drowning at the old YMCA. I couldn't find anything specific, but there was a brief mention in an old newspaper archive about the facility closing temporarily for safety improvements around that time. I haven't been back to the pool area since that morning. I make sure to walk quickly past those chained doors whenever I have to go down that hallway. Sometimes I think I hear sounds coming from behind them, splashing, swimming, maybe even laughter, but I never stop to listen. I've tried to convince myself that there's a logical explanation for what I experienced. Maybe there's some kind of underwater pump system that still runs occasionally, creating those ripples. Maybe the acoustics in that room played tricks on me. Maybe I was just exhausted and half dreaming. But deep down, I know what I heard that morning. I heard someone swimming laps in that abandoned pool. And whoever or whatever it was, they never got out of the water. Story 6. I've never told anyone outside my family about this, but I still get chills every time I think about what happened that Easter Sunday 2 years ago. I'm not big on the supernatural or anything, but I can't explain what I saw that day. It's like my brain keeps trying to find a logical explanation, but there just isn't one. My Uncle Rito had been sick for a long time. He lived in Guadalajara, Mexico, and I hadn't seen him in person for almost 20 years. Our family couldn't afford to travel there often, and he was too sick to come visit us in Southern California. We'd talk on the phone sometimes when I called my grandma, and he'd usually grab the phone for a few minutes to ask about my kids and how things were going. He had this really distinctive laugh that would come out of nowhere, kind of a wheezy chuckle that always made me smile. That Easter morning started like any other Sunday. My husband Miguel and I had been putting off installing this new gate in our backyard for weeks. The old one was practically falling apart, and we finally had a day with decent weather to get it done. The kids were inside watching cartoons and arguing over who got the last Pop-Tart. Typical Sunday stuff. We'd been working on the gate for maybe 2 hours. Miguel was struggling with the hinges while I held the gate in place. My arms were getting tired, and I remember thinking we should just call it quits and finish another day. The sun was beating down on us, and I was getting sweaty and irritated. That's when it happened. I turned around to put down the screwdriver I was holding, and I saw a man walking toward us from the back of our yard. At first, I thought maybe it was our neighbor Tom coming to borrow something, but as the figure got closer, I realized I didn't recognize him. He was tall, maybe around 6 feet, with really dark skin and this wild curly black hair that looked like he'd just woken up. He had a pot belly, but thin shoulders and legs, kind of an unusual build. The weird thing was, he didn't say anything. He just walked around me, almost like he was inspecting what we were doing. I remember freezing in place, not sure if I should say something. Then he just disappeared. Like 1 second he was there and the next he wasn't. He didn't walk away or anything. He was just gone. "Miguel," I said, my voice shaking a little, "did you see that man?" Miguel looked up from the hinge he was fighting with, confused. "What man?" I described what I'd seen, and Miguel looked around, concerned. He walked to the back of the yard to check if someone was there, but there was nothing. Just our fence and the neighbor's house beyond it. "Are you feeling okay?" he asked, putting his hand on my forehead like I might have heat stroke or something. I wasn't surprised that Miguel hadn't seen anything. This wasn't the first time I'd experienced something unusual. Since I was a kid, I've occasionally seen things others don't. Shadowy figures, brief apparitions that disappear when I look directly at them. My abuela used to say I had the sight and would cross herself whenever I mentioned seeing something. I'd learned to keep these experiences to myself mostly, because who wants to be known as the crazy lady who sees ghosts? We finished installing the gate around noon, and I tried to push the strange man out of my mind. We had plans to visit my brother's house later that day. My mom was staying with him for Easter weekend, and she was excited to see the grandkids. As we drove to my brother's place, I couldn't stop thinking about the man in our backyard. There was something familiar about him, but I couldn't place it. It was like when you see an actor in a movie, and you know you've seen them before, but can't remember where. When we got to my brother's house, the kids immediately ran off to play with their cousins. My mom was in the kitchen making tamales, a family tradition for any holiday. She looked tired but happy to see us. My brother Carlos was watching some basketball game and barely looked up when we walked in. About an hour into our visit, my mom's phone rang. She looked at the screen and said, "It's your Tia Lupe from Mexico. I'll call her back later. I want to spend time with my grandbabies." I thought nothing of it at the time. We ate, the kids hunted for Easter eggs in the backyard, and around 4 o'clock, we headed home. The man from our yard had slipped to the back of my mind by then, replaced with to-do lists for the upcoming work week. We'd been home maybe 30 minutes when my phone rang. It was Carlos. "Maria," he said, his voice sounding strange. "Mom just talked to Tia Lupe." Something in his tone made my stomach drop. "What happened?" "Tio Rito died this morning." I sat down hard on the couch, my legs suddenly feeling weak. "What? How?" "His heart gave out. He'd been getting worse the last few months. Tia Lupe said he went peacefully in his sleep early this morning." I barely heard the rest of what Carlos said. My mind was racing back to the figure I'd seen in our yard. The timing? It couldn't be a coincidence, could it? After I hung up with Carlos, I went to our storage closet and pulled out an old photo album. My hands were shaking as I flipped through the pages, looking for pictures from our last family reunion in Mexico, back when I was a teenager. And there he was, Uncle Rito, 20 years younger, same curly, disheveled hair, same potbelly with thin shoulders and legs, the same dark complexion. But there was one thing that didn't match up. In the photos, Uncle Rito was short, maybe 5'8" at most. The man I saw in our yard was definitely taller, closer to 6 feet. Still, everything else was exactly the same. The wild hair, the distinctive body shape, even the way he moved. I sat on the floor, surrounded by old photos, trying to make sense of what had happened. Had I really seen my uncle's spirit on the day he died? Why would he come to me, of all people? We weren't especially close, and why would his spirit appear taller than he was in life? I didn't tell Miguel what I was thinking. He'd already been concerned about me seeing things earlier. Instead, I carefully put the photos back and went to check on the kids. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the moment in my head, turning around and seeing that figure walking toward me. Had there been something he was trying to tell me? Should I have said something to him? The funeral was held in Guadalajara the following weekend. We couldn't afford for all of us to go, so Miguel stayed with the kids while I flew down with my mom and Carlos. It was a small, simple service. Tio Rito had never married or had children, so it was mostly extended family and a few neighbors. During the service, I kept looking at the closed casket, thinking about what I'd seen. I wanted to tell my mom about it, to tell her that Tio Rito had come to say goodbye. But I was afraid it would just make her grief worse, or worse, that she wouldn't believe me. After we returned home, life went back to normal on the surface. But I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. About a week after the funeral, I was helping my mom clean out some old boxes when I found another photo of Tio Rito from when he was in his 20s. In this picture, he was standing next to a height chart at some kind of carnival or fair. He was 6 feet tall. I nearly dropped the photo. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice casual, "was Tio Rito always short?" She looked up from the box she was sorting. "No, mija. He was quite tall when he was younger, but as he got older and sicker, he developed that curve in his back. What do you call it? Osteoporosis. He lost a few inches of height." "Why do you ask?" That's when I decided to tell her. I explained what I'd seen that Easter Sunday, describing the figure in detail. As I talked, tears started streaming down my mom's face. "That morning," she said after I finished, "Lupe told me that right before he passed, Rito kept saying he needed to see his family one more time. He was very upset about it. The nurse gave him something to help him sleep, and he never woke up." We sat in silence for a while, both of us crying. I don't know if telling her brought her comfort or just opened up her grief again, but it felt important that she knew. It's been 2 years now, and I still can't explain what happened that day. Sometimes I try to convince myself that it was just a strange coincidence, that my mind somehow conjured up the image of an uncle I hadn't seen in decades on the very day he died. But deep down, I know what I saw. The strangest part is that I don't feel scared when I think about it anymore. Instead, there's this sense of, I don't know, connection, like knowing that whatever comes after this life, we still find ways to reach the people we care about. I've never had another visitation like that one. Sometimes I find myself turning around quickly, half expecting to see someone there, but it's always just empty air. I still wonder why he came to me specifically. We weren't especially close. Maybe I was just the only one who could see him, or maybe he was making stops to see everyone in the family, and I was just the only one who noticed. Whatever the reason, I'm glad he found his way to us that day, and I'm glad that, at least in those last moments, he was standing tall again. Story 7. I still can't explain what happened that night at Frank's auto shop. It's been 3 weeks, and I've thought about quitting at least a dozen times. The only reason I haven't is because rent doesn't pay itself, and night shift jobs that pay decent money aren't exactly growing on trees in this economy. I've been working at Frank's for about 7 months now. It's this old garage that's been around since the 80s. You know the type. Oil-stained concrete floors, fluorescent lights that flicker just enough to give you a headache after 8 hours, and that permanent smell of grease, rubber, and whatever cleaning products they use that never quite mask the other smells. The place has 3 main bays where cars get worked on during the day, plus a small office area up front with a counter for customers. Most people don't know we have night staff, but Frank keeps someone there 24/7. I work from 11 at night to 7 in the morning, Sunday through Thursday. My job is basically security mixed with prep work for the morning crew, organizing tools, sweeping up, processing parts deliveries that come in after hours, and making sure nobody breaks in. Honestly, it's usually boring as hell, but the pay is decent and I can listen to podcasts most of the night. The shop sits at the end of this commercial strip that's seen better days. There's a laundromat, a payday loan place that looks sketchy even during daylight hours, and this abandoned funeral home across the alley behind us. The funeral home closed down maybe 5 or 6 years ago. Some corporate chain bought them out and moved operations to their bigger facility across town. The building's just been sitting there empty ever since, with faded curtains still hanging in the windows and a cracked sign out front. Frank loves telling new hires that the funeral home is why we need night security. All those ghosts wander over when they're bored, he always says with this wheezy laugh. Gotta have somebody here to keep 'em company or they'll start messing with the equipment. I always rolled my eyes at this. I'm not the superstitious type, and Frank's the kind of old guy who thinks he's hilarious when he's just being weird. So anyway, this happened about 3 weeks ago on a Tuesday night, or I guess technically Wednesday morning. It was around 3 a.m., that dead zone in the night shift where time seems to crawl and your brain starts playing tricks on you. I'd already organized the next day's work orders, swept the main floor, and was in the back of the shop near the tire racks just trying to stay busy. The back area is this narrow space with high metal shelving units for storing tires and some of the bulkier parts. The lighting back there sucks. Just one fluorescent fixture that casts everything in this sickly yellow glow and leaves plenty of shadows. Along one wall there's a row of these heavy steel parts bins where we keep all sorts of metal components. Each bin has this solid steel lid that's seriously heavy, like you need 2 hands to lift it, and it makes your arms shake if you hold it open too long. I was sweeping up some rubber shavings when I heard it, this sharp metallic clank that echoed through the whole shop. I nearly jumped out of my skin when you're alone in an empty building in the middle of the night. Any unexpected noise feels about 10 times louder and 100 times creepier than it would during daylight hours. At first, I thought maybe something had fallen off one of the shelves, or maybe the wind had knocked something over outside. We get strong gusts, sometimes that rattle the bay doors. But this wasn't like that. This was a single deliberate sound inside the building. I stood frozen for maybe 30 seconds, just listening. The shop was completely silent again, except for the constant low hum of the fluorescent lights and the faint buzz of the vending machine in the break room. My heart was going a mile a minute, but I told myself to calm down. I'm a grown-ass adult, not some kid afraid of the dark. I slowly walked toward where I thought the sound had come from, sweeping my flashlight around, and that's when I saw it. The steel lid from one of the parts bins was lying on the floor. Bin number 8. Where we keep transmission components. The lid was just sitting there on the concrete, about 2 feet away from the bin itself. Now, these lids don't just fall off, they're designed not to. Each one sits in a groove on top of the bin, and you have to deliberately lift it up and out to remove it. And like I said, they're heavy, really heavy. It takes effort to move them. This wasn't something that could just vibrate loose or slide off if the building settled. I approached it slowly, half expecting to find that somebody else was in the shop with me. Maybe one of the day mechanics had come back for something they forgot, though nobody had come through the front door, and I would have heard the security beep. "Hello?" I called out, feeling like an idiot in a horror movie. "Anybody here?" Nothing, just the empty shop and that heavy steel lid on the floor. I bent down to pick it up, and that's when something made me hesitate. The lid wasn't just resting on the floor, it was lying flat, as if it had been lifted straight up and then dropped. If it had somehow slid off, it would have been at an angle, probably propped against the bin itself. But this was lying flat on the floor, several feet away from where it should have been. As I was crouching there, staring at it and trying to make sense of what I was seeing, something happened that I still can't explain. The lid, this heavy piece of steel that would take considerable strength to move, shuddered slightly. Just a small movement, like something had bumped it from underneath. I swear I wasn't touching it. I wasn't even within arm's reach yet. My blood went cold. I was completely alone in that shop, but that lid had moved. It wasn't my imagination, and it wasn't a trick of the light. It had physically moved, just a tiny bit, right in front of me. I don't know how long I stayed frozen there, but eventually I worked up the courage to grab the lid and put it back on the bin. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it again. It was as heavy as always, requiring both hands and some effort to lift into place. There was no way this thing had just fallen by itself. Once I had the lid back in position, I backed away, not taking my eyes off it. Part of me expected it to fly off again, but it just sat there, exactly as it should, as if nothing had happened. I spent the next few minutes searching the entire shop. I checked all the doors, locked, windows, secure, no signs of anyone having broken in. The security system was still armed, showing no breaches. I was completely alone. That's when I remembered Frank's stupid joke about the funeral home ghosts, and a chill ran down my spine. I'm not saying I believe in that stuff, but standing alone in that dimly lit shop with no explanation for what I'd just witnessed, it was hard not to let my mind go there. The shop has these small windows high up on the back wall, the kind meant for ventilation rather than looking through. From where I was standing, I could just make out the dark silhouette of the funeral home across the alley. In the moonlight, it looked even more decrepit than during the day, a looming shape with dark windows that seemed to watch me. I tried to shake it off. There had to be a logical explanation, maybe vibrations from a passing truck, maybe the bin had been overfilled and something shifted inside, causing the lid to become unbalanced. But deep down, I knew neither of these made sense. The lid had been deliberately lifted, not slid off, and I had seen it move on the floor. For the remaining 4 hours of my shift, I couldn't settle down. Every creak of the building, every distant car passing by, every whisper of the heating system kicking on, they all had me jumping. I kept finding excuses to stay in the front office area, away from the back of the shop where the bins were. I turned on every light I could find, even the ones we normally keep off to save electricity. At one point around 4:30, I heard another sound, a soft scraping from the back area, like metal sliding against metal. I stood in the doorway to the main shop floor, flashlight gripped tight in my sweaty hand, debating whether to investigate. The responsible part of me knew I should check it out. That's literally my job. But something else, some primal instinct, kept me rooted to the spot. "Hello?" I called out again, my voice embarrassingly shaky. "Is anyone there?" The scraping stopped immediately. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the noise had been. I'm not proud of this, but I didn't go back there. I stayed in the front office for the rest of my shift, watching the security cameras on the ancient monitor that gives such grainy footage it's practically useless. Nothing showed up on camera, of course. When 6:30 rolled around and the first morning mechanic, Dave, arrived, I nearly collapsed with relief. I didn't tell him what happened, What was I supposed to say? Hey, a ghost moved a bin lid? Instead, I just did the normal handover, telling him about the work orders and parts deliveries expected that day. Before I left, though, I went back to check the parts bin one more time, with the safety of daylight starting to creep through the windows and another person in the building. The lid was exactly where I'd left it, sitting properly in its groove. Nothing looked disturbed. If I hadn't been there to witness it, there would be zero evidence anything unusual had happened. As I was walking to my car, I glanced over at the funeral home. In the grey morning light, it looked ordinary, just an abandoned building with peeling paint and a few broken windows. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from one of those upper floor windows. Just a shadow, a slight movement behind the dirty glass. I blinked, and whatever I thought I saw was gone. I've worked 5 shifts since then, and nothing else has happened. No more falling lids, no unexplained noises. But I can't stop thinking about it, replaying that moment over and over in my head, looking for an explanation I haven't found yet. I've started bringing an extra flashlight to work. I keep the radio playing all night now, just to have some background noise. And I never ever turn my back on those parts bins. Maybe there is a logical explanation. Maybe I was more tired than I realized that night. Or maybe Frank's stupid joke about funeral home ghosts wasn't a joke after all. All I know is that heavy steel lid moved on its own, and I still can't explain how or why. Story 8. I've never told this to anyone outside my family before. I'm still trying to process what happened, even though the first part of this story took place over 30 years ago. I guess I'm hoping that writing it all down might help me make sense of it, or at least find others who've experienced something similar. I grew up in Elderwood, one of those picture-perfect small towns where everybody knows everybody. My grandparents owned this beautiful old Victorian house at the edge of town, the kind with gingerbread trim and a wraparound porch that creaked when you walked on it. It was built sometime in the late 1800s, and it had all these little nooks and crannies that were perfect for a curious kid like me. The attic was my favorite place in the whole house. You had to climb this narrow, steep staircase to get there, and the door at the top always made this dramatic groaning sound when you pushed it open. The space was filled with old trunks, forgotten furniture covered in sheets, and boxes of stuff my grandparents had collected over the decades. It smelled like dust and old wood, and something else I could never quite identify. Something that made the air feel heavier somehow. What I loved most about the attic was the window. It was this small dormer window that opened outward, and if you were small enough, which I was at 5 years old, you could squeeze through it and sit on the little section of roof just outside. From there you could see the whole town spread out below. The church spire, the town square, the river that cut through the valley. It was magical to me. My parents and grandparents had no idea I did this. They'd have had a heart attack if they knew I was regularly climbing out onto a roof 3 stories up. Looking back now as an adult, I realize how incredibly dangerous it was. One slip, one wrong move, and I would have fallen to my death. But when you're 5, you don't think about consequences like that. You just think about adventure. It was summer break, and I was spending 2 weeks at my grandparents' house while my parents were away on a trip. It was a hot July afternoon, and everyone was downstairs taking naps or reading. I snuck up to the attic as I always did, excited for my little roof expedition. The attic was stifling that day. The heat rising through the house made it feel like an oven. Dust particles floated in the beams of sunlight that streamed through the window. I weaved my way through the maze of old furniture, making my way toward the window. That's when I heard it, a rhythmic creaking sound coming from the far corner of the attic. It was a corner I rarely explored because it was darker there, the light from the window barely reaching it. But now, something was there, moving. I froze in my tracks. The sound continued. Creak, pause, creak, pause. Steady and deliberate, my curiosity got the better of my fear, and I took a few tentative steps toward the sound. That's when I saw her. In the corner sat an old woman at a spinning wheel. She was wearing a long dress with a high collar, the kind you see in old black and white photographs. Her grey hair was pulled back tightly in a bun, not a single strand out of place. Her hands moved with practiced precision as she worked the wheel, which made that creaking sound with each rotation. The strangest thing was the light. The corner should have been in shadow, but there was a sort of glow around her, not bright, but enough that I could see her clearly despite the dimness of that part of the attic. I stood there, frozen in place, just watching her. She didn't look up at first. She just kept working, her hands never stopping. Then, slowly, she raised her head and looked directly at me. Her eyes, I'll never forget her eyes. They were pale blue, almost colorless, and they seemed to look right through me. She didn't smile, she didn't frown. Her face remained completely expressionless, but those eyes held me in place. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. She didn't say a word. She just looked at me and slowly, deliberately shook her head from side to side. The message was clear even to 5-year-old me. No, don't go further. Don't go to the window. I don't know how long we stared at each other. It could have been seconds or minutes. Time seemed to stand still in that attic. Then she looked back down at her spinning wheel and continued her work as if I wasn't there. That broke the spell. I turned and ran. I didn't care about the noise I was making as I stumbled down the attic stairs, nearly falling in my haste to get away. I burst into the living room where my grandmother was reading, my chest heaving, tears streaming down my face. "Anne, what on earth is the matter?" My grandmother put down her book and rushed to my side. I couldn't tell her. I couldn't tell anyone. Some instinct told me that adults wouldn't believe me, that they'd say I was making things up or having a bad dream. So I lied. I said I'd seen a big spider in the attic and it scared me. My grandmother laughed, hugged me, and told me not to worry about silly spiders. I never went back to the attic alone after that, and I definitely never tried to climb out that window again. Something about the woman's silent warning had gotten through to me in a way that no parental lecture about safety ever could. As the years passed, the memory remained vivid, but I began to doubt myself. Had I really seen a ghostly woman at a spinning wheel, or had my 5-year-old imagination conjured her up? Maybe I'd fallen asleep in the attic and dreamed the whole thing. Maybe I'd seen a play or movie with a similar scene, and my brain had inserted it into my memories. I convinced myself it must have been something like that. After all, ghosts weren't real. I grew up, went to college, moved away from Elderwood, built a career, and started my own family. My grandparents passed away when I was in my 20s, but my parents kept the house. My sister and her husband eventually moved into it with their kids, renovating parts of it but keeping its historical charm intact. Life went on, and the memory of the woman in the attic faded to the background of my mind, still there but rarely thought about, until last month. I was visiting my sister for dinner. It was a typical family gathering. My parents were there, my sister's husband was grilling in the backyard, and my niece Emma, who's now 6, was running around with her little brother. We were all sitting around the dining table, catching up and sharing stories, when Emma started talking about how she liked to explore the house. "I have a secret place," she announced proudly between bites of mac and cheese. "It's up in the attic. There's a window you can open, and you can see the whole town." My blood ran cold. I looked at my sister, who seemed completely unaware of what her daughter was saying. "Emma, you're not climbing out on the roof, are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Emma shook her head. "Not anymore. The old lady told me not to." The fork fell from my hand, clattering loudly against my plate. Everyone turned to look at me, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from Emma. "What old lady, sweetheart?" my mother asked. Emma shrugged, suddenly shy with all the attention on her. "The lady in the attic. She sits in the corner with her spinning thing. She doesn't talk, but she shook her head at me when I tried to go to the window. She looked sad and scary at the same time." My sister laughed nervously. "Emma has such an imagination. She's always making up stories about the house." But I knew better. My hands were shaking as I pushed away from the table. "Emma, can you tell me more about this lady? What did she look like? Emma looked at me curiously, probably wondering why I was so interested in her imaginary friend. She's really old. She wears an old-timey dress, like from the olden days, and her hair is all gray and pulled back really tight in a bun. She never smiles. She just looks at me and shakes her head. I don't go up there anymore. She's scary. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Every detail matched what I had seen, what I thought I had seen over 30 years ago. The dress, the bun, the spinning wheel, the silent warning. "Anne, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." My sister reached out to touch my arm, not realizing how appropriate her choice of words was. I excused myself and went to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face as I tried to make sense of what was happening. It couldn't be a coincidence. Emma had described exactly what I'd seen all those years ago, down to the smallest detail, and she'd been the same age I was when I saw the woman, 5 years old. When I returned to the table, I tried to act normal, but my mind was racing. After dinner, when Emma was playing in another room, I pulled my sister aside and told her everything about my childhood experiences in the attic, about the woman at the spinning wheel, about how I'd never told anyone before. My sister didn't laugh or dismiss me as I'd feared. Instead, she looked troubled. "Emma's been talking about this woman for months. I thought it was just her imagination. But last week, I found her looking through an old photo album, one with pictures from when the house was first built. She pointed to a woman in one of the photos and said, 'That's her. That's the lady from the attic.' It was creepy, but I didn't think much of it until now." My sister went to a bookshelf and pulled out a large leather-bound album. She flipped through the yellowed pages until she found what she was looking for. "Here," she said, pointing to a faded sepia photograph. The photo showed a stern-looking woman sitting at a spinning wheel. She wore a high-collared dress, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. According to the handwritten caption beneath, her name was Margaret Eldridge, one of the original owners of the house, who died in 1893 after falling from a window. I stared at the photograph, a chill running down my spine despite the warmth of the room. It was her, the woman I'd seen in the attic, the woman Emma had seen. That night, after everyone else had gone to bed, I climbed the narrow stairs to the attic. I don't know what I expected to find. Perhaps closure, perhaps answers, or perhaps nothing at all. The attic had been cleaned up and partially converted into a storage space, but that corner, her corner, remained untouched, as if my sister's family had unconsciously avoided it. I stood there in the dark, waiting, listening. No creaking of a spinning wheel broke the silence. No ghostly figure appeared in the shadows. But as I turned to leave, I felt it, a cold spot in the otherwise warm room, right where she had sat all those years ago. And I knew with absolute certainty that she was still there, still watching, still protecting. I believe now that Margaret Eldridge has been watching over the children in this house for generations, warning them away from the same fate she suffered. She appeared to me when I was 5, and then to Emma 30 years later, both of us the same age, both of us drawn to the dangerous allure of that attic window, both of us saved by her silent warning. I don't know why she chose to appear to us and not to others. I don't know if she's still trapped in that attic or if she stays by choice, fulfilling some self-appointed duty to protect the house's youngest inhabitants. All I know is that she was real. She is real, and thanks to her, both Emma and I are alive today. I never believed in ghosts before. Now I'm not so sure what to believe. Story 9. I've never shared this with anyone outside my family, but I need to get this off my chest. I'm not sure if anyone will believe me, but honestly, I don't care anymore. This is just my reality. I'm 18 now, but for as long as I can remember, our basement has never been just a basement. My parents bought this house before I was born. When my older siblings were little, they're 27 and 24 now. It's a nice house, normal in every way, except for what we call the hole. In the far corner of our unfinished basement, there's this weird floor-to-ceiling indent. It's not a crack or anything, more like the wall just decides to cave inward for no reason. My parents used that corner for storage for the first 22 years they owned the place. Old Christmas decorations, winter clothes, tools, random junk. all piled up in and around that indent. Looking back, I think they were subconsciously trying to fill the space. Like maybe if they crammed enough stuff in there, whatever was coming through wouldn't have room to get out, because something was definitely coming through. Even as a little kid, I hated going into the basement. I'd stand at the top of the stairs and feel like I was being watched, not the normal dark basement creeps that all kids get. This was different. I knew something was specifically watching from that corner. I can't explain how I knew, I just did. And twice, once when I was 4 and again when I was 6, I saw eyes glowing in the darkness there, not reflecting light like an animal's eyes would. These were giving off their own glow, yellow-green and unblinking. My parents always dismissed it when I'd refuse to go down there or when I'd run back upstairs crying. They'd say, "Emma's just being dramatic again," or "she's got an overactive imagination." But my siblings knew better. They felt it too, though they were older and better at hiding their fear. The worst part was the nightmares. Between ages 5 and 10, I had the same recurring nightmare at least twice a week. In it, I was being hunted through an abandoned hospital by a man with half a face. Not like Two-Face from Batman, more like the right side of his face was just missing. Not bloody or gory, just absent, like it had been erased. He'd always catch me, and then he'd start hurting me, cutting me, burning me. I'd wake up screaming every time. But here's the truly fucked up part. Sometimes I'd wake up with actual marks on my body. Once, after dreaming he'd cut my arm with rusty scissors, I woke up with 3 thin red lines across my forearm. After he burned me with something in another dream, I had a circular red mark on my thigh the next morning. My mom saw these marks. She couldn't explain them away. That's when she finally took me seriously. She's religious, not fanatical, but she believes. She blessed me with holy water she'd gotten from church and prayed over me every night for a week. I remember her kneeling by my bed, holding my hand, tears streaming down her face, as she begged whatever was hurting me to leave me alone. And it worked. The nightmares stopped completely. The feeling of being watched faded. For years, the basement was just a basement again. I still didn't like going down there, but the paralyzing fear was gone. Then, when I was 14, my older brother and his girlfriend found out they were expecting a baby. They couldn't afford their own place, so my parents offered to convert the storage area in the basement into a small apartment for them. They cleared everything out of that corner, and that's when the activity started again. At first, it was just objects disappearing and reappearing in different places. My brother would put his keys on the counter, turn around to grab something from the fridge, and turn back to find the keys gone. They'd show up hours later in the bathroom or under a pillow. Electronics would turn on and off by themselves. Their TV would switch channels randomly, or the volume would suddenly blast at full capacity in the middle of the night. The weirdest thing was the flashlights. My brother kept a couple of emergency flashlights that wouldn't work because the batteries were dead. He kept meaning to replace them but never got around to it. One night during a power outage, he grabbed one out of desperation, and it worked perfectly. Once the power came back on, the flashlight died again. Dead batteries. This happened multiple times. My parents finally acknowledged something wasn't right, but they didn't know what to do about it. My dad's solution was to cover the hole with particle board. He nailed it up over the indent, painted it to match the wall, and placed a bookshelf in front of it. That board is still there today. Things calmed down again after my brother and his family moved out. The basement apartment sat empty for a few years. Then last summer, I asked if I could move down there. I wanted more privacy, my own space, typical teenage stuff. My parents were hesitant, but eventually agreed. That's when everything ramped up again. Within the first week of moving in, I started seeing things, not just glimpses out of the corner of my eye, but actual figures, shadow people. A tall, thin silhouette that would stand in the doorway to the bathroom, a smaller shape that seemed to peer around corners, and they weren't just passing through. They interacted with things. My hairbrush would move across the dresser while I was looking right at it. My bedroom door would slowly swing open when I had closed it. Once I watched as the pages of a book on my nightstand flipped one by one, like someone was reading it. There was one entity that was more aggressive than the others. It would stand behind my bedroom door at night. I could see its shadow underneath. It would walk down the stairs but stop after the sixth step, always the sixth step, never coming all the way down. I could hear the creaking. The worst incident happened when I was alone in the house. Everyone was gone for the weekend, and I was in my room watching Netflix. I heard footsteps upstairs, moving from the kitchen to the basement door. Then I heard the basement door open, then footsteps on the stairs, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then silence. A minute later, my doorknob started jiggling like someone was trying to get in. I was fucking terrified. I called my mum sobbing, and she told me to leave the house immediately. I did, and I didn't come back until everyone else was home. After that, I decided I'd had enough. The next time I felt that particular presence, I stood up and said out loud, "This is my space now. You need to learn your place or get out." I wasn't brave, I was just pissed off and tired of being scared in my own home. I felt ridiculous talking to an empty room, but immediately after I said it, the temperature dropped about 10 degrees. The air felt heavy, like right before a thunderstorm, but the harassment stopped. That entity never jiggled my door handle again. A few weeks ago, my mom decided she'd try to fix the situation once and for all. She came down with her holy water and Bible and started praying near the boarded-up hole. I wasn't supportive. By this point, I'd gotten used to my basement roommates and had established boundaries that seemed to be working. But my mom was determined. The entities were not happy about her attempt to close their portal, or whatever it is. While she was praying, doors all over the house started slamming shut. Towels in the bathroom were pulled down off their racks. The TV in the living room turned onto static at full volume. My mom kept praying through all of it, but I could tell she was terrified. After that day, something changed again. Now the entities seem to deliberately avoid activity when I'm around. It's like they're sulking, but the second I step outside my room, they make their presence known. My laptop will be moved to a different position on my desk. My closet door will be open when I return, even though I always keep it closed. My shower curtain will be drawn when I know I left it open. The weirdest part is that I've developed this strange, I don't know, bond with them. That sounds crazy, I know. But I actually got mad at my mom for trying to kick them out. I feel protective of them somehow. They're not evil, at least not anymore. It's like they've just been here so long that they consider this their home too. Last week, I was sitting on my bed studying when I distinctly felt someone sit down next to me. The mattress dipped and everything. I didn't look up. I just said, "I'm trying to study for my history test. Can you not?" The weight disappeared immediately. An hour later, when I went to the bathroom, I came back to find all my history notes neatly stacked and my highlighters arranged by color. So that's where things stand now. I live in a basement with a supernatural portal that my family has been dealing with for over 2 decades. I have non-human roommates who move my stuff and open my doors, but also organize my school supplies. My mother thinks we need an exorcism. My father pretends nothing is happening. My siblings tell their friends our house is haunted, but in a fun, joking way that makes everyone think they're exaggerating. And me? I'm just trying to finish high school while coexisting with whatever comes through that hole in the wall. I've started to wonder if they're really malevolent at all, or if they're just lost, confused, stuck between worlds. The nightmares and marks from my childhood still scare the hell out of me when I think about them, but that particular entity seems long gone. Sometimes late at night, I look at that particle board covering the hole and wonder what would happen if I took it down. I never will. I'm not that stupid, but I wonder, what exactly is on the other side? Where do they come from? Why our house? These questions keep me up more than the actual entities do these days. I'm not sure what the future holds for our unusual household arrangement. But I do know one thing. I'll never be able to live in a normal house after this. How boring would that be? Story 10. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened last month. I've gone over it 1,000 times in my head, and I still can't make sense of it. I'm not the type who believes in ghosts or anything supernatural, but what I experienced that night has seriously messed with my head. I was studying for my final exams, calculus and physics back to back, typical end-of-semester hell. My eyes were burning from staring at textbooks for hours, and my brain felt like mush. It was around 8 in the evening when my dad knocked on my door. "Marcus, you look terrible," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "You should take a break. Go for a walk or something. Fresh air will help you sleep better." I knew he was right. I'd been at it since 2 in the afternoon, and the equations were starting to blur together. Our place is in this quiet suburb just outside Warsaw. Not quite countryside, but definitely not city center either. Lots of family homes, a few apartment buildings, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else's business. I grabbed my jacket and reached for my AirPods. Dead. Great. I plugged them in to charge and figured I'd just have to deal with my thoughts for company. Looking back now, maybe that was the first warning sign I should have noticed. I'm never without music when I walk. It was around 8:30 when I stepped outside. The air was cool but not cold, early spring weather when you can feel winter loosening its grip. The streetlights were already on, casting those orange glows that make familiar streets look slightly different, slightly off. I didn't have a specific route planned. Just wanted to clear my head, maybe walk off some of the stress before trying to sleep. Our neighborhood is pretty safe. At least that's what I always thought. Nothing ever happens here. I hadn't even reached the end of my street when I felt it. This weird sensation like someone was watching me. You know that feeling when the hairs on the back of your neck stand up for no reason? It was exactly like that. I turned around, half expecting to see someone there, but the street behind me was empty. I kept walking but couldn't shake the feeling. Every few minutes I'd glance behind me, convinced someone was there. It wasn't just paranoia, there were these little sounds too. Like footsteps that would stop whenever I stopped, a shuffling that didn't quite match my own pace. I reached the local church about 15 minutes into my walk. Father Nowak was outside locking up. I've known him since I was a kid. He baptized me, gave me my first communion, all that stuff. Seeing a familiar face made me feel a bit better. "Marcus, studying hard for exams?" he asked, pocketing his keys. We chatted for a few minutes about school and my plans for university. I didn't mention the weird feeling I had. It seemed stupid to say out loud, but even while talking to him, I kept glancing around, scanning the shadows between the streetlights. After saying goodbye to Father Nowak, I decided to loop around toward the main street before heading home. That's when things got truly bizarre. The main street in our town isn't exactly bustling, especially on a weeknight. A few shops, most of them closed by that hour, some apartment buildings above the shops, and streetlights spaced a bit too far apart for comfort. As I turned onto it, I immediately noticed 2 people walking ahead of me. They were maybe 200 meters away, walking side by side. From that distance, I couldn't tell much about them, just 2 figures under the streetlights. One seemed slightly taller than the other, but both wore dark clothes. Nothing particularly strange about them at first glance. I kept walking at my normal pace, and gradually the gap between us narrowed. I wasn't trying to catch up to them or anything, just heading in the same direction. After about 5 minutes, I was maybe 30 or 40 feet behind them. Close enough now to see they were both wearing dark coats or jackets that reached past their knees. They walked perfectly in sync, which was kind of odd but not impossible. I remember thinking I should maybe cross the street to avoid creeping them out by following too closely behind. Just as I was about to do that, something happened that I still can't explain. A dog barked somewhere behind me, loudly and suddenly enough that I instinctively turned my head to look. It was just for a second, no more than that. When I turned back to look ahead, they were gone, completely gone. I stopped dead in my tracks. The street ahead of me was empty for at least 100 meters. There was nowhere they could have gone. The main street runs straight at that point, with only one side street branching off to the right about 20 meters ahead of where I last saw them. If they'd turned down that street, I would have seen them do it. They couldn't have covered that distance in the split second I looked away. On the left side was just a solid row of buildings with closed shops on the ground level. No doorways they could have ducked into without me hearing a bell or seeing them fumble with keys. No gates they could have gone through without making noise. They were just gone. My heart started racing. I stood there for a good minute trying to make sense of it. Maybe they ducked into some doorway I couldn't see. Maybe they ran really fast when I wasn't looking. But no, that didn't make sense. Even if they sprinted the moment I turned away, they wouldn't have had time to disappear completely. I cautiously walked forward to the point where I last saw them. I looked down the side street. Empty. I checked the shop doorways, all locked up tight for the night. There were a couple of gates leading to residential courtyards, but they were the heavy metal kind that squeak loudly when opened. I would have heard them for sure. By this point, my skin was crawling with goosebumps. The feeling of being watched was now 10 times stronger. I felt exposed, standing there on the empty street like whatever had happened was somehow meant for me to see, or maybe whatever those things were, because I was starting to doubt they were normal people, wanted me to follow them. I decided right then that I was done with my walk. I turned around and started heading home, walking much faster than before. The streets that had seemed perfectly normal an hour earlier now felt threatening. Every shadow could be hiding something. Every sound made me jump. About halfway home, I passed an elderly couple walking their dog. The sight of normal people doing a normal thing should have calmed me down, but it didn't. Instead, I found myself wondering if they were real or if they'd vanished too, if I looked away for a second. I gave them a wide berth as I passed, earning a strange look from the old man. When I got home, my parents were watching TV in the living room. Dad asked if the walk had helped clear my head. I mumbled something about feeling better and went straight to my room. I didn't tell them what happened. What would I even say? I saw 2 people disappear into thin air. They'd think I was losing it from exam stress. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the scene in my head, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe they ducked into a doorway I didn't notice. Maybe there was an alleyway I overlooked. But deep down, I knew there wasn't. I know that street like the back of my hand. I've walked it 1,000 times. There was nowhere they could have gone in that split second. I found myself thinking about the priest I'd talked to earlier. What would Father Nowak say about this? Would he talk about angels or demons or some other spiritual explanation? I've never been particularly religious despite my Catholic upbringing, but that night I actually prayed. I prayed for protection from whatever was out there, whatever had shown itself to me. The next few days, I was a mess. I couldn't focus on studying. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those 2 figures disappearing. I started taking different routes when I had to go out, avoiding the main street completely. I even started using my dad's car for short trips I would normally walk. It's been a month now, and I still haven't gone back to that stretch of the main street after dark. I don't know if I ever will. During daylight, it looks completely normal, just shops and apartment buildings, nothing sinister about it. But I know something happened there that night, something I can't explain. I've researched similar experiences online. Some people talk about glitches in the Matrix or parallel universes. Others mention more supernatural explanations, ghosts, shadow people, things like that. None of it really feels right to me. Whatever I saw that night doesn't fit neatly into any category I can find. The worst part isn't even the memory of what happened. It's the fear that it could happen again, that whatever those things were, they were showing themselves to me specifically. I can't shake the feeling that they were aware of me following them, that the whole thing was deliberate somehow. Sometimes when I'm lying in bed at night, I hear footsteps outside my window that don't sound quite right, too perfectly timed, too rhythmic. And I wonder if they're coming back for me, those figures that can vanish in the blink of an eye. I wish I could say this story has some kind of resolution, or that I figured out what happened, but I haven't. All I know is that something impossible happened on a normal night in my boring suburb, and I can't forget it no matter how hard I try. If anyone else has experienced something similar, please let me know, because right now I feel like I'm going crazy trying to make sense of something that defies all logic. And yes, I still look over my shoulder constantly. I still check behind me when I hear footsteps. And I never ever go for walks at night without my fully charged AirPods and phone anymore. Not that music would help if they came back, but at least I wouldn't hear those perfectly synchronized footsteps until it was too late. Story 11. I still don't know how to explain what happened to me last February. I've replayed it in my mind 1,000 times, wondering if grief was playing tricks on me or if there's something more to this world than we understand. All I know is what I experienced, and I need to get it off my chest. Heather and I met at a gastroparesis clinic about 10 years ago. Both of us were there for the same reason. Our bodies were essentially failing us. The doctors had given us both terminal diagnoses, though mine was expected to progress more slowly. There's something about meeting someone who truly understands your daily struggle that creates an instant bond. We just clicked. Despite living about 2 hours apart, we talked every single day. Sometimes for hours, sometimes just a quick text to check in. When you're living with the knowledge that your time is limited, you don't waste it on small talk. We shared everything: our fears about dying, our frustrations with treatments that barely worked, the way people looked at us with pity. She understood me in a way no one else could, not even my husband Mark. Heather was the free spirit I wished I could be. Even as her body failed her, she remained stubbornly vibrant. She wore these ridiculous Grateful Dead shirts that were too big for her shrinking frame and refused to stop dyeing her hair bright colors despite how the chemicals made her feel afterward. "They already think I'm dying," she'd laugh. "Might as well give them something interesting to look at." The night before Valentine's Day last year, I went to bed around 11, earlier than usual because I was having a bad pain day. I remember taking my meds and Mark kissing me goodnight before going back to the living room to finish some work. Everything was normal, utterly unremarkable. At exactly 2:47 in the morning, I woke up choking, not the kind where something goes down the wrong pipe, but a violent, crushing sensation, like something was physically squeezing my airways shut. I sat bolt upright, clawing at my throat, unable to make a sound. My lungs burned as I struggled to draw even the smallest breath. Mark wasn't in bed yet, and I couldn't call out for help. Black spots started dancing in my vision as I desperately tried to force air through my constricted windpipe. Just as I thought I was going to pass out, the pressure suddenly released. I gasped so hard it hurt, gulping air like I'd been underwater for minutes. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my temples. I was still trying to calm my breathing when my phone rang. Nobody calls at that hour unless something is terribly wrong. The screen showed Julie's name, Heather's wife. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely swipe to answer. "Sarah?" Julie's voice was hoarse, broken. I knew immediately. "What happened?" I whispered, though I already knew. "It's Heather. She's gone. Had a heart attack about half an hour ago. The paramedics tried, but..." Julie broke down, unable to continue. My brain couldn't process it. Half an hour ago would have been right around 2:15 or 2:20, right before I woke up choking. I don't remember much of that conversation. I know I promised to come over the next day, that I told her how sorry I was, that I asked if she needed anything, all while my mind kept replaying the feeling of my airway closing, the terror of not being able to breathe, the exact moment the pressure released, like something passing through me. The next few weeks were a blur of grief. The funeral, helping Julie sort through Heather's things, the endless well-meaning but empty condolences from people who had no idea what Heather had meant to me. I kept my phone charged constantly, still expecting her daily texts. I'd catch myself picking it up to tell her something funny or frustrating, only to remember all over again that she was gone. A month after she died, Mark suggested we go for a walk at the local nature preserve. It was unseasonably warm for March, and he thought the fresh air might help clear my head. I'd been having more symptoms lately. Stress makes my condition worse, but I agreed. Physical activity is hard for me, but small walks on flat terrain are usually manageable. We parked and started down the paved trail that loops around the small lake. I was feeling okay at first, better than I expected. We made it about halfway around when I felt the first warning signs of an autonomic seizure coming on. Anyone with dysautonomia knows that feeling, like your body is suddenly not your own. First came the dizziness, then the tingling in my feet and hands. I grabbed Mark's arm. "I need to sit," I managed to say. As the numbness started creeping up my legs, Mark looked around frantically. "The nearest bench is still a ways up. Can you make it?" I shook my head as my legs began to feel disconnected from my body. This was happening fast, faster than usual. My vision started tunneling, and I knew I had maybe 30 seconds before I lost control completely. Mark was trying to guide me toward the grass so I wouldn't fall on the pavement, but I couldn't coordinate my movements anymore. My tongue felt thick in my mouth as I tried to warn him I was going down. These seizures aren't like epileptic ones. I don't convulse, but my body essentially shuts down, and I can't move or speak while remaining partially conscious. It's terrifying every single time. As the numbness reached my waist, I looked ahead, trying to spot somewhere safe to collapse. That's when I saw her. Heather was standing about 20 feet ahead on the path, wearing her favorite faded Grateful Dead shirt with the dancing bears across the front. Her hair was that ridiculous purple she'd dyed it right before Christmas. She looked healthy, not the gaunt, pale version of herself from her final months, but vibrant and strong like when we'd first met. She was smiling at me, her hand extended. "Come on, baby, I got you," she said, using the same phrase she always used when I was having a bad day. I tried to tell Mark she was there, but my voice wasn't working anymore. The seizure was taking hold, but I wasn't scared anymore. I reached toward Heather as my legs gave out completely. Mark caught me before I hit the ground, easing me down as I lost the ability to hold my head up. Through my narrowing vision, I could see Heather kneeling beside me, opposite from Mark. He was frantically calling 911, but she was calm, her hand stroking my hair. "It's okay," she whispered. "I promised I wouldn't leave you, remember? I keep my promises." I felt tears sliding down my face as the seizure fully took hold. Usually these episodes are filled with panic. The helplessness of being trapped in your own body is indescribable. But this time, with Heather there, I felt almost peaceful. I could hear Mark giving our location to the dispatcher, could feel him checking my pulse, but it all seemed distant and unimportant. Heather stayed with me, talking softly about nonsense things like she used to when I was in the hospital. She told me about the other side, as she called it, how it wasn't what either of us had expected, how she wished she could explain it better, but some things can't be translated into words. "Your time's not yet," she said, as I heard the distant wail of an ambulance siren. "But I'll be here when it is, and until then, I'll still be around. You'll feel me." The paramedics arrived, their voices cutting through the fog as they assessed me. One shined a light in my eyes, another was taking my vitals. Mark was explaining my condition, showing them my medical ID bracelet. Through it all, Heather remained, just slightly out of their way, still talking to me. As they lifted me onto the stretcher, she stood and blew me a kiss. "See you soon, but not too soon," she said, with that crooked smile of hers, and then she was gone. I came back to awareness in the ambulance. These seizures typically last 20 to 30 minutes, and I was starting to regain sensation in my extremities. The paramedic noticed me becoming more responsive and called to his partner. "She's coming around." Mark squeezed my hand. "You're okay. You had a seizure at the park, remember?" I nodded slightly, my neck muscles still weak. I tried to form words, my tongue still clumsy. "Heather," I managed to say. "She was there." Mark's face fell. "No, honey. Heather's gone, remember?" "Saw her," I insisted, frustrated by my inability to explain. "In her dead shirt, purple hair." The paramedic exchanged a look with Mark, that look people give when they think you're confused or delusional. "It's the seizure," Mark explained to me gently. "Sometimes you hallucinate during them. Remember last time you thought there was a dog in the bedroom? But this wasn't like that." The dog had been a hazy, dreamlike image. Heather had been solid, real. I could still feel the sensation of her hand brushing my hair. Could recall exact words she'd said. This wasn't a hallucination. It was her. At the hospital, they ran the usual tests, found nothing new or concerning beyond my existing conditions, and sent me home with instructions to rest. Mark was extra attentive that night, checking on me frequently, clearly worried. When he finally went to sleep, I lay awake, replaying every detail of seeing Heather. I remembered the last conversation we'd had before she died. We'd been talking about what comes after, whether there's really anything waiting for us. "If I go first," she'd said, "I'll find a way to let you know. I promise I'll never really leave you." I hadn't taken her literally at the time. It was just something people say to comfort each other. But now, I'm not so sure. It's been almost a year and I haven't seen her again, not clearly like that day, but sometimes I catch a whiff of her distinctive patchouli perfume in places it has no reason to be. Sometimes my phone will play a Grateful Dead song without me selecting it. Once, during another hospital stay, a nurse I'd never met before used Heather's exact unique phrase, "Come on, baby, I got you," as she helped me to the bathroom. I don't tell people about these experiences anymore, not even Mark. I know what they'll think, what they'll say, that it's grief or wishful thinking or my medication or my condition affecting my brain. Maybe they're right. Maybe none of it is real. But I know what I experienced that day at the park. I know what I felt in those early morning hours when I woke up choking at the exact moment she was leaving this world. I know my best friend kept her promise, and honestly, in a strange way, it's comforting. Because now I'm not so afraid of what comes next. When my time finally comes, whether that's next year or 10 years from now, I know she'll be there, hand extended, ready to guide me through. Come on, baby, I got you. Story 12. I've never told this story to anyone outside my family. Even now, 20 years later, typing this out makes my skin crawl and my scalp tingle in a way that's all too familiar. Growing up in suburban Melbourne, our family had a simple routine when one of us kids got sick. My mum, Sarah, worked as a nurse at the local hospital, but she'd always take the day off when me or my brothers were too ill for school. I can still remember how it felt, that weird mix of feeling awful physically, but somehow special because you got one-on-one time with Mum. I was about 13, maybe 14 when it first happened. It was the middle of winter, and I'd come down with some nasty flu that was going around school. My temperature was through the roof, and Mum decided I needed to stay home. I remember drifting in and out of sleep that morning, the kind of heavy, feverish sleep where reality gets all blurry. At some point I heard my bedroom door open, that specific creak it always made about halfway through. My eyes were closed, but I could hear the soft footsteps crossing my carpet. I recognized Mum's gait instantly. I'd heard it 1,000 times before. The mattress dipped slightly at the edge as she sat down, just like she always did when checking my temperature. I waited for the familiar feeling of her cool hand on my forehead, that gentle, motherly touch that somehow made you feel better instantly, but it never came. After a few seconds, I opened my eyes, expecting to see Mum sitting there, probably with the thermometer ready, but there was nobody there. The room was completely empty. I sat up, confused. "Mum?" I called out. No answer. I figured maybe I'd dreamed it, or maybe she'd been called away suddenly by the phone or something before she could check my temperature. Fever dreams can be pretty realistic after all. I didn't think much more about it and eventually fell back asleep. A few weeks later, I was completely better and back at school. It was the middle of the week, probably around 2 in the morning when I woke up suddenly. My door was opening, that same familiar creak. I wasn't sick this time, and I couldn't figure out why Mum would be checking on me in the middle of the night. The footsteps crossed my room again, and I felt the distinct sensation of someone sitting on the edge of my bed. The mattress dipped down, and I could feel my blanket tighten across my chest as it was pulled slightly by the weight. "Mum," "What's wrong?" I asked, still groggy with sleep. No answer. I reached over and flicked on my bedside lamp. No one was there. The weight on the mattress was gone immediately, but the blanket was still pulled tight where something had been sitting. I got up and checked the hallway. Everyone was asleep, doors closed. Mum and Dad's room was at the end of the hall, and their door was firmly shut. I convinced myself I was having some kind of weird recurring dream and went back to bed. But I left the light on for the rest of the night. It happened again, about a week later, and then again a few days after that, always the same. The door, the footsteps, the weight on the bed, sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes during an afternoon nap. I started sleeping with my light on all the time, but it didn't make any difference. After about the 5th time, I finally mentioned it to Mum one morning at breakfast. "Hey Mum, have you been coming into my room at night to check on me?" She looked at me, puzzled. "No, why would I? Are you feeling sick again?" I told her what had been happening, trying to sound casual about it, even though it had been freaking me out more and more each time. I expected her to laugh it off or tell me I was dreaming. Instead, her face went pale. "That's strange," she said finally. "Your Uncle Mark mentioned something similar happening to him recently." Uncle Mark was Mum's younger brother. He lived alone in an apartment about 20 minutes away from us. "What do you mean?" I asked, suddenly not wanting to know the answer. "He said he keeps feeling someone sit on his bed at night, but there's never anyone there." That's when I got really scared. It wasn't just me. After my conversation with Mum, things escalated. It wasn't just the bed sitting anymore. I started hearing footsteps on the roof at night, directly above my room. Heavy, deliberate steps that would pace back and forth for hours. Our house was single-story, and there was no way anyone could be up there without a ladder. Dad checked multiple times, but never found anything. Then came the feeling of being watched. I'd wake up in the middle of the night with this overwhelming sense that something was looming over me in the dark. I could feel a presence, something cold and hostile, standing beside my bed or in the corner of my room. I'd lie there paralyzed, afraid to open my eyes, but equally afraid to keep them closed. The bed incidents got worse too. Sometimes it felt like all 4 corners of my mattress were being sat on simultaneously, pushing down with impossible weight. Other times, something would push up from underneath my mattress, lifting me slightly before dropping me back down. I started sleeping on the couch in the living room, but that only worked for a few nights before it followed me there too. I was exhausted all the time. My grades started slipping, and I was irritable and anxious constantly. My parents were worried, but what could they do? Dad was skeptical, thinking it was just teenage angst or my imagination running wild. Mum believed me, but she seemed as helpless as I was. Then came the night that I still can't think about without feeling sick. It was a Tuesday in August, around 3 in the morning. My older brother was away at a school camp, so it was just me, my younger brother, and my parents in the house. I'd finally managed to fall asleep after lying awake for hours, listening to those footsteps pacing on the roof. I woke up suddenly to a strange sensation in my hair. It felt like something was crawling through it, like fingers lightly running across my scalp. Half asleep, I reached up to brush it away, thinking it might be a spider or something. There was nothing there, but the feeling continued. I brushed at my hair again, harder this time. Still nothing tangible, but the sensation persisted, more deliberately now, like someone was playing with my hair. I was fully awake by this point and absolutely terrified. I reached up a 3rd time, and that's when it happened. A hand, something that felt exactly like a human hand, but couldn't possibly be one, grabbed a fistful of my hair and yanked, hard enough that my head was jerked backward. I felt individual fingers wrapped in my hair, tugging violently. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. Then, as suddenly as it had grabbed me, it let go. I bolted from my room and spent the rest of the night huddled on the floor of my parents' bedroom, too terrified to explain what had happened. I told them I'd had a nightmare and left it at that. The next morning, something happened that I still can't explain to this day. My older brother called from his school camp. He'd been given permission to make a quick call home because he wasn't feeling well. When Mum put me on the phone, the first thing he said was, "Something weird happened last night." I couldn't sleep because something kept pulling my hair. I hadn't told anyone what had happened to me. Not Mum, not Dad, no one. How could my brother, kilometers away at a camp in the mountains, experience the exact same thing on the exact same night? When he got home and we compared notes, the timing matched perfectly. Around 3 a.m., both of us had our hair pulled by something invisible. His experience had been exactly like mine. First, the sensation of something playing with his hair, then the violent yanking. That was the breaking point for my mum. She'd been raised Catholic, but hadn't been particularly religious as an adult. But after this, she called an old friend who was into spiritual stuff. Crystals, energy cleansing, that sort of thing. The woman came over and smudged our house, burning these herb bundles in every room while saying prayers or chants or something. Mum also placed Bibles in every room of the house, including one under my mattress. She hung crucifixes over all our doors. Dad thought she was overreacting, but he didn't stop her. Whether it was the spiritual cleansing or just coincidence, the incidents started to decrease after that. The bed-sitting happened less frequently, then stopped altogether. The footsteps on the roof became fainter, then disappeared. The feeling of being watched faded. By the time I turned 15, it had stopped completely. We never figured out what it was or why it happened. Uncle Mark's experiences stopped around the same time as mine did. I'm 34 now, with a family of my own, and I've never experienced anything like it since, but I still can't sleep with my back to an open room. I still flinch when I feel unexpected movement on my bed, and I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, certain that I've heard my bedroom door creak open, footsteps crossing the floor, and the mattress dipping beside me. The worst part isn't the memory of what happened. The worst part is not knowing what it was or why it chose us, or whether someday, without warning, it might come back. Story 13. I still struggle to talk about what happened last August without getting chills. It was around 2 in the morning when I got home from a late movie with my friends. Our suburb in Oak Ridge is normally super quiet, one of those places where people leave their garage doors open during the day without thinking twice. That night felt different though. I remember pulling into our driveway and feeling this weird sensation, like something was off. Maybe it was because it was so late and I was tired, but the house looked different somehow. Darker? I don't know. I just remember sitting in my car for a minute, staring at our house, before finally grabbing my bag and heading inside. I used my key to get in through the front door, trying to be quiet since I knew my dad would probably be asleep. He's always been protective, especially since Mom left when I was 14. Even at 20, he still waits up sometimes or texts me to check I'm safe. That night, I planned to head upstairs first to let him know I was home before grabbing something to eat. As I closed the front door behind me, I heard this sound. It's hard to describe. Kind of like a soft thud followed by something being dragged. It came from the direction of our kitchen, which is at the back of the house. At first, I thought maybe my dad was up getting water or something, but then I remembered how he always calls out Kim whenever he hears me come in. I stood frozen in our entryway. Our house was completely dark except for the small nightlight we keep plugged in near the stairs. I contemplated just running upstairs, but what if it was just my dad? Or maybe our cat Milo had knocked something over. "Hello?" I called out softly, not wanting to wake Dad if he was asleep, but also not wanting to sneak up on him if he was downstairs. No answer. I took a few steps toward our kitchen, fishing my phone out of my pocket to use as a flashlight. The dim blue glow barely illuminated anything, but I didn't want to flip on the actual lights and wake up the whole house. That's when our security system suddenly blared to life. The high-pitched beeping made me jump so hard I nearly fell over. "Front door motion detected, system armed," announced the robotic voice from our Vivint panel, which made no sense because I had just come in through that door several minutes ago. The system should have already registered that motion when I first entered. Before I could even process what was happening, I heard my dad's bedroom door fly open upstairs. Kim, Kim! His voice was panicked in a way I'd never heard before. I'm here, Dad, down here, I called up, my heart racing. He appeared at the top of the stairs, wearing boxers and an old t-shirt, his hair sticking up everywhere. Relief washed over his face when he saw me, but only for a second before it was replaced with concern. Get up here now, he ordered, and something in his tone made me run up those stairs without questioning him. My 16-year-old brother Tyler appeared in his doorway, rubbing his eyes. What's happening? Dad pushed us both toward his bedroom. Stay here, lock the door, I'm going to check the house. Dad, I heard something in the kitchen before the alarm went off, I said, my voice shaking. His expression hardened. Lock the door behind me. Don't open it unless you hear me say it's clear. He grabbed the baseball bat he keeps in his closet, the one I always teased him about never needing in our quiet neighborhood. Suddenly, it didn't seem like such a ridiculous precaution. Tyler and I huddled in Dad's room, the door locked, listening to him moving through the house. We could hear the floorboards creaking as he moved methodically from room to room. The minutes stretched out endlessly. The system said front door motion, Tyler whispered. But you came in like 5 minutes before that, right? I nodded, feeling sick to my stomach. I was already inside when it went off. Tyler pulled out his phone and opened our Vivint app. Maybe we can see what triggered it. Before he could check, we heard Dad calling up to us. It's clear. You can come out. We found him standing in our living room, the baseball bat still gripped tightly in his hand. He looked pale. The garage door was wide open, he said, running a hand through his hair. The one to the outside. It was completely open. Did someone break in? Tyler asked, his voice cracking. Dad shook his head. I don't see any signs of forced entry or that anyone was in the house. Nothing's missing that I can tell. But I know I closed and locked that door before going to bed. We have a door that leads from our attached garage directly outside. It has a keypad lock, and we always keep it secured. Could you have forgotten? I suggested, though I knew Dad never forgets things like that. No, he said firmly. I double-checked everything before going up. I always do. He went around checking all the doors and windows again, making sure everything was locked. Then he reset the security system. We were all too wired to sleep, so we sat in the living room talking in low voices about what might have happened. Dad suggested maybe someone had tried to break in but got spooked when they realized people were home. It made sense, but something about it didn't feel right to me. About 20 minutes after the first alarm, all our phones buzzed simultaneously. Another alert from Viventi. Motion detected, garage camera at 2:37 a.m. read the notification. Dad immediately opened the app. The thumbnail image for the video made my blood run cold. There was someone, or something, standing in our garage. The figure was blurry but unmistakable, tall with what looked like a dark hoodie pulled low over their face. They were standing perfectly still, facing the camera. What the hell? Dad muttered, tapping the thumbnail to play the video. But when the video loaded and began playing, there was nothing there. Just our empty garage with its shelves of tools and boxes. Where did they go? Tyler asked, leaning over to see better. Dad replayed the video. Again, nothing but an empty garage. This doesn't make sense, he said, frowning at his phone. The thumbnail clearly shows someone there. He went frame by frame through the video, but the figure never appeared. Not in a single frame. Maybe it's a glitch, I suggested, though I didn't believe it. The thumbnail got mixed up with someone else's footage or something. Dad called Vivint right then, despite it being nearly 3 a.m. They confirmed that our system had registered motion in both locations, first the front door, then the garage, but they couldn't explain the discrepancy between the thumbnail and the actual video. The technician said he's never seen anything like it, Dad told us after hanging up. He's sending someone out tomorrow to check the system. Could it be like a reflection or something? Tyler asked. Maybe headlights from a passing car created a weird shadow. We all knew it wasn't that. The figure had been too distinct, too obviously human-shaped, and our garage camera faces inward, away from the street. Dad insisted on checking the house one more time, including the attic and the crawl space in the basement that we hardly ever use. He found nothing. None of us slept that night. We sat together in the living room until morning, jumping at every creak and groan of the house. When daylight finally came, it brought little relief. The Vivint technician arrived around noon. He checked every component of our system, tested all the cameras, and reviewed the footage from the night before. Everything was working correctly, according to him. "So how do you explain this?" Dad asked, showing him the thumbnail with the figure and the video without it. The technician studied it for a long time. "I honestly don't know, sir. I've never seen this happen before. The thumbnail is generated from a frame in the video itself, so logically that figure should appear in the video at some point, but it didn't. No matter how many times we watched it or how slowly we went through it, the figure remained visible only in the thumbnail. What made it even more unsettling was when my dad asked, could it be Kim? Maybe the camera caught her when she came home." The technician shook his head. "The timestamp on this is after you had already gone upstairs. And besides," he added, looking at me, "were you wearing dark clothing last night?" I wasn't. I'd been wearing a bright yellow top and white shorts. Nothing like the dark, hooded figure in the image. The technician left without any real explanation, just a vague suggestion that maybe the system experienced some kind of processing error. Dad wasn't satisfied with that answer, and neither was I. We had the locks changed the next day. Dad installed additional security measures, more cameras, better outdoor lighting, door jammers. For weeks, we were all on edge, checking and double-checking locks, watching the security app obsessively. But nothing else happened. No more mysterious alarms, no more phantom figures in thumbnails that disappeared from videos. It's been over a year now, and I still don't have an explanation for what happened that night. Sometimes I try to convince myself it was just a weird technical glitch, like the Vivint guy suggested. But then I remember the sound I heard in the kitchen before the alarm went off, the feeling that something wasn't right when I first pulled into our driveway. The most disturbing part? Last week, I was going through old photos on my phone and found a screenshot I'd taken of that thumbnail with the figure in our garage. Except now, when I look at it, the figure is in a slightly different position than I remember, turned more toward the camera, as if looking directly at it, as if looking at us. I haven't told my dad or brother about this change. I'm not even sure if I'm remembering it correctly or if my mind is playing tricks on me. But sometimes when I'm home alone late at night, I swear I hear that same soft thud and dragging sound coming from downstairs. And I find myself wondering if whatever or whoever was in our house that night ever actually left. Story 14. I'm still not sure if I should be writing this. Part of me wants to forget the whole thing happened, but another part of me needs to get it off my chest. Maybe someone here has experienced something similar and can tell me I'm not crazy. This happened during my freshman year of college, about 6 months ago. It was finals week, and everyone was stressed out of their minds. My friend group and I had been cooped up in our dorm rooms for days studying, and we desperately needed a break. There were 4 of us: me, Matt, Jason, Ethan, and Kyle. We decided to go for a walk around campus around 11 at night. The campus was practically empty except for a few students shuffling between the library and their dorms with that zombie-like finals week stare. We were just wandering aimlessly when Ethan noticed that the fine arts building door was propped open with a small rock. "Hey, check it out," he said, pointing to the door. Someone left it open. During normal hours, this wouldn't be unusual, but this was nearly midnight during exam week. The building should have been locked up. "We should check it out," Kyle suggested, already heading toward the entrance. I hesitated. "Is that a good idea? We could get in trouble." Jason laughed. "Come on, Matt. We're not going to break anything. Just a quick look around. Better than going back to study for calc." I gave in pretty easily. To be honest, I was curious too. The Fine Arts building was one of the oldest on campus, built in the 1920s, and had that creepy historic vibe that makes you wonder what's happened there over the decades. As we slipped inside, the air felt immediately different, cooler, musty, like old paper and paint. The hallway lights were dim to their night setting, casting long shadows down the corridors. Our footsteps echoed against the tiled floors. "Let's check out the theater," Ethan suggested. We'd all seen performances there, but never had the chance to go backstage. We made our way through the building, trying to stay quiet, even though there was nobody around. The theater was locked, which was disappointing but not surprising. We were about to head back when Kyle noticed a stairwell. "Where do you think this goes?" he asked. "Probably just classrooms," I said, but he was already heading down. The stairwell led to a basement level that I didn't even know existed. Unlike the upper floors with their well-maintained appearance, the basement had bare concrete walls and exposed pipes running along the ceiling. The fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered, giving everything a sickly glow. "This is where they keep all the costumes and props," Jason said, peering through a wire-reinforced window in one of the doors. He tried the handle, and surprisingly it opened. Inside was a massive storage room filled with racks of costumes, stacked props, and old set pieces. It smelled like dust and fabric. We wandered through, looking at the weird assortment of items: medieval swords, Victorian dresses, animal masks, and furniture from every time period imaginable. "Check this out," Ethan called from the back of the room. We made our way over and found him standing in front of another door. This one had a sign that read, "Keep shut at all times," in bold red letters. We all looked at each other. "Well, now we have to open it," Kyle said with a grin. "I don't know, man," I said, feeling a strange reluctance. "Maybe there's a reason for the sign." "It's probably just a fire safety thing," Jason reasoned. "Or maybe they keep expensive stuff in there." "Only one way to find out," Kyle said, and before I could object further, he turned the handle and pushed the door open. Behind it was a narrow hallway with more pipes running across the ceiling. The hall was maybe 20 feet long, ending at another door. Between us and that door was a pile of logs stacked against the wall. "Why are there logs down here?" Ethan asked. "Old set pieces, maybe," Jason suggested. I held the forbidden door open, suddenly very aware that we were in a horror movie situation. "Hey, Jason, grab one of those pieces of wood. We should prop this door open just in case." Jason turned to look at me. "Why?" "You scared?" he teased. Before he could say anything else, the side door at the end of the hall flew open. There was no slow creaking, no gradual movement. It just violently swung inward, as if someone had kicked it with full force. A gust of wind rushed past us, cold and aggressive, carrying a smell I can only describe as damp earth and something metallic. We all froze for a split second, and then there was a distant slam from somewhere up the stairwell we'd come down. "Fuck this," Kyle shouted, and we all bolted. I let go of the door we'd entered through, and it slammed shut behind us as we ran through the costume storage room, back into the main basement hallway, and up the stairs. Jason was right behind me, and I could hear him breathing hard. "Did you hear that?" he gasped as we reached the first floor. "Hear what?" I asked, still running toward the exit. "A girl. I heard a girl's voice on the stairs." We burst out of the building into the night air, not stopping until we reached the well-lit path leading back to our dorm. We stood there, catching our breath and looking back at the Fine Arts building. From the outside, it looked completely normal, windows dark, except for the security lights. "Did anyone else hear a voice?" I asked, looking at Ethan and Kyle. They both shook their heads. "I swear I heard something," Jason insisted. It was faint, like someone was calling out. We debated what had happened all the way back to the dorms. Ethan thought it was just air pressure when we opened the door. Kyle wondered if someone else was in the building and trying to scare us. Jason was convinced he'd heard a voice, and I didn't know what to think. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that door flying open and felt that rush of cold air. The next night, we went back. I know that sounds stupid, but we'd convinced ourselves there had to be a rational explanation, and we'd brought two more friends, Mike and Drew, for safety in numbers. I think we were all trying to prove we weren't scared. This time, the main door was locked. We almost gave up, but Drew found an unlocked window on the ground floor that we could squeeze through. Once inside, we made our way back to the basement with our phone flashlights leading the way. The costume storage room was exactly as we'd left it. We approached the keep shut at all times door with more caution this time. "So what's the plan here?" Mike asked. "We just open it and see if the same thing happens?" "I want to check what's behind that other door," Kyle said. "We never got to see." "I think we should test our theory about air pressure," I suggested. "If we open this door slowly and there's just a normal draft, then we'll know it was nothing." Everyone agreed. Drew volunteered to film it on his phone while Ethan slowly opened the door. Nothing happened. The hallway looked the same. Pipes overhead, logs stacked against the wall, door at the end firmly closed. We stepped inside, and I made sure to grab a piece of wood to prop our door open. Kyle and Jason cautiously approached the door at the end of the hall. Kyle looked back at us, then turned the handle and pushed it open slowly. Behind it was just a small mechanical room with a boiler and electrical panels. "See? Nothing," Kyle said, sounding both relieved and disappointed. We spent about 20 minutes exploring the rest of the basement, finding nothing more exciting than old theater equipment and dusty storage rooms. As we were leaving, I explained to Mike and Drew what had happened the previous night, now feeling slightly embarrassed that we'd made such a big deal out of it. "The door probably just flew open because of a draft," I concluded. "The air pressure in these old buildings can do weird stuff." Everyone seemed satisfied with that explanation, and I was too, mostly. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something about the basement wasn't right. The smell that had come through that door wasn't just musty air. And why would Jason think he heard a voice? I pushed those thoughts aside. Finals were more important than ghost stories. The next day changed everything. I was back in my dorm room helping my roommate Bryce with some research. Bryce has a physical disability that makes it hard for him to move around, so I often helped him with stuff around the dorm. We were both sitting at our desks working on our laptops when I heard it. A whistle. 3 distinct notes in a pattern, like someone calling a dog. High, low, high. I looked up at Bryce. "Did you just whistle?" He shook his head. "I thought that was you." We both looked around our small dorm room. There was nowhere for someone to hide, and our window was closed. "Maybe it came from the hallway," I suggested, though it had sounded like it was right in the room with us. We went back to work, but about 5 minutes later, there it was again, the same 3 notes, just as clear as before. Bryce looked uneasy. "That's weird. It sounds like it's coming from right here." "Let's go to the living room," I suggested. Our dorm was a suite style with 2 bedrooms connected to a small common area. We relocated to the couch in the living room and tried to focus on our work again. For about 15 minutes, everything was normal, and I started to relax. Then the whistle came again. Same pattern. High, low, high. It sounded like it was coming from directly above us. Bryce looked up at the ceiling. "Okay, this is freaking me out." I tried to stay calm. "It's probably just the pipes or something. This building is old." "That didn't sound like pipes, Matt. That sounded exactly like someone whistling." We sat in silence for a moment, both tense and listening. Then Bryce did something I still can't believe. "If someone's there, whistle again," he called out, his voice steady but challenging. The response was immediate. 3 clear notes. High, low, high. We looked at each other, and I saw real fear in Bryce's eyes. Without saying a word, we both grabbed our phones and headed for the door. Bryce moved faster than I'd ever seen him move before. We went down to the lobby and sat there for over an hour, trying to make sense of what had happened. We called our other roommates, but they were both at the library. We asked people in neighboring rooms if they'd heard any whistling, but no one had. "Sound doesn't travel between the rooms," one of our neighbors insisted. "The walls are too thick." Eventually, we worked up the courage to go back. We brought another guy from our floor with us just in case. Our suite was empty and quiet. We checked every corner, behind furniture, in closets. Nothing. But that night, as I was trying to fall asleep, I heard it again. The whistle. 3 notes. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, but didn't call out. I just listened. It happened 2 more times, about 10 minutes apart, and then never again. I've never heard the whistle since that night. I never told my friends about it either, not even Jason. I'm convinced that whatever was in that basement followed me back somehow. It was trying to communicate, and when I wouldn't respond, it gave up and left. I still don't know what would have happened if I'd answered that whistle. Story 15. I've been debating whether to share this for a long time. It's been almost 4 years, but I still get goosebumps thinking about it. I was 17 when it happened, just a typical high school junior who thought nothing bad could ever touch me. It started innocently enough. My friend Jess got a Ouija board for her birthday, and a bunch of us decided to try it out at my place one weekend when my parents were having dinner with friends. There were 5 of us: me, Pamela, Jess, Katie, Zach, and Dylan. We'd all grown up together in our small town where nothing exciting ever happens. We set up the board on my bedroom floor, lit some candles, mostly for atmosphere, and gathered around it. None of us really believed it would work. I mean, it's just a piece of cardboard with letters on it, right? We were just looking for something to do on a boring Friday night. At first, we asked stupid questions. Does Ryan like Katie? Will Zach pass his driving test? Is Mrs. Peterson secretly an alien? That kind of stuff. We laughed when the planchette started moving because we all assumed someone was pushing it, but then it started spelling out answers that were weirdly accurate, like when it told Katie that Ryan had been texting another girl from our math class, something none of us knew until Katie checked his Instagram messages later. We started getting more invested, meeting up a few nights in a row. Each time, we'd dig a little deeper with our questions. That's when things began feeling off. The 3rd night, we asked who we were talking to. The planchette spelled out Mary and claimed she was a woman who died in 1850-something. We asked more about her life, and she gave details about living on a farm and losing 3 children to scarlet fever. The next night, the entity said it was Kevin, a 13-year-old boy who died in a car accident in 1976. When Zach pointed out this was different from before, the planchette flew across the board, spelling out, I'm whoever I want to be today. I can be an old man, tomorrow a child. That made my stomach drop. I remember looking at my friends' faces and seeing they felt it too. That cold, creeping feeling that maybe we weren't just pushing the pointer around ourselves. Trying to sound brave, Dylan asked, "How do you take people?" I still don't know why he asked that specific question, but I wish he hadn't. The answer came slowly, deliberately. By choking them, that's fun. We all pulled our fingers back like the planchette had burned us. Katie started crying, and we packed the board away, promising to stop. I put it in my closet, thinking that would be the end of it. The following weekend, my parents and younger brother went to my aunt's 50th birthday party, about an hour away. I was supposed to go too, but I claimed I had a headache so I could stay home and finish a history project that was due Monday. The truth was, I just didn't want to spend the evening with relatives asking about college plans. They left around 4 in the afternoon. I'd be alone until at least midnight. At first, I felt fine. I made a sandwich, watched some Netflix, and tried to focus on my homework. But as it got darker outside, I couldn't shake this feeling of being watched. I kept glancing at my bedroom door, knowing the Ouija board was in my closet. Eventually, I grabbed my laptop and went to my parents' bedroom instead. It felt safer somehow. I turned on every light in the house, the hallway, the bathroom, the kitchen, the living room, everything. I felt stupid doing it, but I couldn't help myself. I propped myself up on my parents' bed with pillows and tried to distract myself with funny videos. Around 9:30, I noticed the hallway light had turned off. I figured the bulb must have burned out, so I went to check. When I flipped the switch, it came on perfectly fine. Weird, but I convinced myself I must have been mistaken about turning it on earlier. I went back to my parents' room, but not even 10 minutes later, I noticed the hallway was dark again. This time, I knew I had left that light on. My heart started racing as I got up and turned it back on, my hand shaking on the switch. When I got back to the bed, I was full-on panicking. I grabbed my mom's Bible from her nightstand and started reading random passages out loud. I'm not even religious, but it felt like the right thing to do. As I read, my eyes kept getting heavy. It was strange. I wasn't tired before, but suddenly I could barely keep my eyes open. I dozed off for what felt like seconds. When I woke up, the Bible wasn't in my hands anymore. It was lying next to me on the bed. I picked it up again and continued reading, fighting to stay awake. But eventually, I fell asleep again. I don't know how long I was out before something violently woke me up. I felt hands gripping my ankles. Actual physical pressure, like someone was grabbing me. I tried to kick, but the sensation started moving up my legs, over my waist, my chest, until it reached my throat. Then it started choking me. I couldn't breathe. I was gasping, clawing at my neck, but there was nothing there to fight off. The lights were still on, and I could see the entire empty room, but something was strangling me. I could feel fingers pressing into my windpipe. My vision started going dark around the edges. In absolute terror, I remembered my mom kept a small silver crucifix in her nightstand drawer. I managed to reach over and yank the drawer open, my lungs burning for air. My fingers closed around the crucifix, and I clutched it to my chest, silently begging, pleading for whatever was happening to stop. As suddenly as it started, the pressure vanished. I gulped in air, sobbing and shaking uncontrollably. I scrambled off the bed and ran outside to the front porch, where I stayed until my parents' car pulled into the driveway around 12:30. I was freezing in the October night air, but I refused to go back inside alone. My parents thought I had a nightmare or an anxiety attack. No matter how much I insisted it was real, they just exchanged those concerned parent looks. My dad checked the house, finding nothing out of place, and eventually I had to go back inside. I slept on the floor of my brother's room that night, with the hallway light on and the door open. I barely got any sleep. The next day I was completely exhausted. My parents went grocery shopping in the afternoon and my brother was at soccer practice. I tried to take a nap in my own room for the first time since the incident, figuring it would be safe in daylight. I was drifting off when I felt something tugging at my blanket. I opened my eyes, thinking it might be our cat, but what I saw makes me question my sanity to this day. Standing at the foot of my bed was what looked like a small boy, but not a normal boy. He was tiny, maybe 18 inches tall, with the face of a child, but a body proportioned like a miniature adult. His hair was dark, neatly combed to the side, and he was wearing this weird one-piece garment, almost like a toga or something. His eyes didn't look right. They were too aware, too old for his childlike face. For a few seconds, we just stared at each other. I was completely frozen, too terrified to even scream. Then, without making a sound, he turned and walked straight into my closet, the same closet where I'd put the Ouija board. I bolted from my room and didn't go back until my parents were home. I didn't tell them about the boy. After the previous night, I knew they wouldn't believe me. That night, I pushed my desk chair against my closet door before going to sleep. Around 3 in the morning, I woke up to see the closet door slowly opening, pushing the chair aside inch by inch. I ran to my parents' room and spent the rest of the night on their floor, telling them I had a nightmare. The next night, I tied the closet door shut with my laptop charging cable before going to bed. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to violent shaking. The whole closet door was rattling like something inside was trying to get out. The cable was straining, about to snap. I grabbed my pillow and blanket and slept in the bathtub with the bathroom door locked. The following day, Jess came over. She wanted to use the Ouija board again to ask about her boyfriend, who she suspected was cheating. I told her about everything that happened, but she thought I was exaggerating to scare her. She practically begged, saying we'd just ask one question and be done. Against my better judgment, I got the board out. As soon as we put our fingers on the planchette, before Jess could even ask anything, it started moving rapidly. PAMELAREMISETOGODBONTBREAKTTIMEILLTAKEYOU. Jess went white. I threw the board in its box and drove straight to the dumpster behind the grocery store, tossing it in without a second thought. The activity stopped after that. No more lights turning off, no more choking, no more tiny boy. But the fear stayed with me for years. I slept with the lights on until college. I still can't look in my closet mirror at night. I don't know what we contacted through that board. I don't know if it was real or if I somehow made it happen by believing it could. All I know is I felt those hands on my throat, and I saw that thing in my room. I'm 21 now, and I still wake up some nights feeling like I can't breathe. I've never touched a Ouija board again, and I never will. Some things aren't meant to be played with, and some doors, once opened, are almost impossible to close completely. Story 16. I still can't explain what happened when I was a kid. It's been almost 20 years, but I think about it all the time. My sister Alice hasn't been the same since, and honestly, neither have I. Growing up, Alice and I were super close. We shared a bedroom until I was about 6 or 7, when my parents finally converted the small office into my own room. I was excited to have my own space, but Alice and I still spent most of our time together. About a month after I moved into my new room, Alice mentioned something weird at breakfast. She looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes, and she was pushing her cereal around without eating much. "Hey Lucas, can you stop watching me at night? It's creeping me out," she said casually, like she was asking me to pass the milk. I looked up from my bowl, confused. "What are you talking about? I don't watch you at night. Last night, you were standing at my door for like an hour, just staring at me." I laughed, thinking she was playing some kind of joke. No, I wasn't. I was asleep. My mom chimed in, not really paying attention as she packed our lunches. "Alice, stop making up stories and eat your breakfast. You'll be late for school." Alice shrugged and dropped it, but she kept giving me these weird looks all day. I figured she'd had a bad dream or something and thought it was real. A few nights later, I woke up to screaming. Not just any screaming. Alice was shrieking my name. "Lucas, get out! Leave me alone!" I bolted up in bed, heart pounding, completely disoriented. My dad rushed past my room into Alice's. I followed, rubbing sleep from my eyes. "What's wrong? What happened?" My dad was sitting on Alice's bed, trying to calm her down. She was hysterical, pointing at her doorway. He was there again. Lucas was standing there watching me. She was sobbing, her whole body shaking. My dad looked at me, standing in the hallway. "What are you doing up, buddy?" "I heard Alice screaming," I said, still half asleep. I was in bed the whole time. My mom appeared behind me, putting her hand on my shoulder. "Alice, honey, Lucas was in his room. You had a nightmare." But Alice wouldn't calm down. She kept insisting I had been standing in her doorway, just staring at her. He wouldn't say anything. He just stood there. I felt sick to my stomach. I hadn't left my room. I swear I hadn't. After that night, it kept happening. Not every night, but often enough that everyone was on edge. Sometimes I'd wake up to her screaming. Other times I'd hear about it at breakfast. "You were at my door again last night," she'd say, her voice flat, resigned. Every time, I insisted it wasn't me. My parents started keeping their door open at night. My dad even set up one of those baby monitors in the hallway between our rooms. They tried everything to figure out what was going on. They checked the house for possible intruders, made sure all the windows and doors were locked, and even took Alice to a doctor to see if she might be having night terrors. The doctor said Alice was fine, physically at least. He suggested it might be stress from school or just an overactive imagination. But I knew my sister. She wasn't making this up. The whole thing was starting to seriously freak me out. What if I was sleepwalking without knowing it? What if I was doing these things but couldn't remember? I started having trouble sleeping, afraid I'd get up in the middle of the night without realizing it. One morning, about 3 months into this nightmare, my mom suggested Alice and I share a room again. "Just temporarily," she said, "until we figure this out." Alice freaked out. "No, I don't want him in my room." She looked at me with fear in her eyes. It crushed me. My own sister was terrified of me. "I'm not doing anything," I yelled, tears welling up. "I'm not watching you. I swear." My parents were at a loss. We were all exhausted, confused, and scared. They eventually installed a lock on Alice's door, one that could only be locked from the inside. She seemed relieved by this, and for a few nights there were no incidents. Then came the worst night of all. I was sleeping deeply when the most blood-curdling scream I've ever heard ripped through the house. Alice was screaming my name, screaming for help. I jumped out of bed, heart racing, and ran to her door. It was locked. My dad appeared beside me, fumbling with the lock, calling out to Alice, "Honey, unlock the door. It's okay. It's just Dad." The screaming continued. I'll never forget the raw terror in her voice. When my dad finally got the door open, Alice was pressed against the headboard of her bed, knees pulled up to her chest, pointing at the middle of her room. "It was coming toward me," she sobbed. "It never moved before, but it was walking to my bed." My dad flipped on the light and checked under the bed, in the closet, behind the curtains. Nothing. Then he looked at me, standing in the doorway, and something in his expression shifted. "Lucas, where were you just now?" "In my room," I said automatically. I was asleep until she started screaming. My dad's face went pale. "No, buddy, you were in our room. You crawled into our bed about an hour ago because you had a bad dream." I felt like the floor dropped out from under me. "What?" "No, I was in my room." My mom appeared behind us, her voice shaky. "Lucas has been with us for the past hour." He fell asleep between us. Alice's eyes went wide, darting between all of us. "Then who was that?" she whispered. "That was the last night it happened. Whatever had been watching Alice, whatever had been using my face, it never came back. But the damage was done." Alice refused to sleep alone for months. She slept in our parents' room, then with a nightlight, then with all the lights on. She developed this whole routine of checking her room before bed, turning off the light with her eyes closed so she wouldn't see anything standing in the doorway. Even now, as a 26-year-old woman, Alice sleeps with a light on. She says a specific prayer before bed every night, which is weird because she's not even religious. When I asked her about it once, she said, "It's not for God, it's to keep it away." We've talked about those nights a few times over the years. The last time was about 5 years ago when we were both home for Christmas. We stayed up late, had a few drinks, and somehow the subject came up. Alice described what she saw in detail for the first time. She said it looked exactly like me. Same pajamas, same height, same build, but covered in what she called a dense shadow. The hallway light was always on, but this shadow wouldn't reflect any light. It just stood there, perfectly still, watching her. She said she would sometimes try to talk to it, thinking it was really me, but it never responded, never blinked, never moved, until that last night, when it started walking toward her bed after she yelled at it to leave her alone. "It didn't walk normally," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper even though we were alone. "It moved like it was trying to remember how to walk, like it was wearing your body but didn't know how it worked." I asked her why she thought it stopped appearing after that night. She just shook her head. Maybe it got what it wanted. Maybe it got bored. Or maybe it's just waiting. I've spent years trying to make sense of what happened. Was it some kind of doppelganger, a skinwalker, something paranormal that used my likeness to terrorize my sister? Or was it something even more disturbing? Did something leave my body at night without me knowing? I still don't have answers. All I know is that something pretended to be me, something that looked like me but wasn't me, and it terrorized my sister night after night. And the worst part, there was nothing I could do about it. Nothing I can do now except wonder if it's still out there somewhere, wearing my face, waiting for the right moment to return. Sometimes when I visit Alice at her apartment, I catch her watching me with this look, like she's checking to make sure it's really me. And honestly, I don't blame her, because whatever that thing was, it left a mark on both of us. Every now and then, I wake up in the middle of the night with this feeling that I'm not alone. I lie there perfectly still, listening, and sometimes, just sometimes, I swear I can hear breathing that isn't mine. Story 17. I'm not sure why I'm finally writing this down. I've been holding on to these experiences for years now, trying to rationalize them, but I just can't anymore. Maybe sharing this will help me make sense of it all, or at least let me know I'm not going crazy. My grandmother passed away in the summer of 2016 after battling illness for almost 8 months. She was everything to me, the kindest, most loving person I'd ever known. We were incredibly close. When her health started declining rapidly in late 2015, our family rented a small house near hers in our village outside Maplewood so we could take care of her. I'd spend every day with her, talking about everything and nothing, watching old shows together or just sitting in comfortable silence. The night she died is burned into my memory. I was sitting next to her bed, holding her hand. She was so weak, but she squeezed my fingers and looked right at me. "Nathan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "remember me and light a candle once in a while for me." Those were her last coherent words to me. She slipped away early the next morning with all of us around her. I was devastated. The following weeks were a blur of funeral arrangements, relatives, and this hollow feeling I couldn't shake. But it wasn't until about 3 weeks after we buried her that the first strange thing happened. I'd gone alone to visit her grave. It was a Tuesday afternoon, cloudy but not raining. The cemetery was completely empty. I brought fresh flowers and spent some time cleaning around her headstone, pulling weeds and making sure everything looked nice. I talked to her while I worked, telling her about my week and how much I missed her. It felt good, therapeutic almost, and I stayed longer than I'd planned. It was getting dark when I finally headed back to my car, a red Toyota Celica I'd saved up for years to buy. As soon as I got in and turned the key, something weird happened. The radio came on at full volume, blasting static, then immediately cut out. The dashboard lights flickered erratically, dimming and brightening without any pattern. My first thought was, great, electrical problems, but my car was only 3 years old and had never had issues before. I was fiddling with the radio when I glanced up at my rearview mirror. That's when I saw it, a figure standing maybe 30 yards behind my car near the path leading from the cemetery. It was too far away and too dark to make out clearly, just a silhouette really, but something about it made my skin crawl. I turned around in my seat to look directly, but I couldn't see anyone. When I faced forward again, the most intense smell hit me. My grandmother's perfume. It was unmistakable, this specific rose and vanilla scent she'd worn for as long as I could remember. It wasn't subtle either. It was as if someone had sprayed it directly inside my car. My heart started racing, and I felt this bizarre mix of comfort and absolute terror. I looked in the rearview mirror again, and the figure was gone. Just gone. At the exact same moment, my dashboard stopped flickering and the car seemed normal again. Well, almost normal. The audio system stayed dead. No radio, no connection to my phone, nothing. I checked it repeatedly on the drive home, but it was completely fried. The next day I took it to a mechanic who couldn't find anything wrong with the electrical system, yet the audio never worked again. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was just overwhelmed with grief and imagining things. The car issue was just a coincidence. But deep down, I knew something unexplainable had happened. About 2 months later, I had to travel for work and booked an Airbnb for the weekend. It was a small guest house, nothing fancy, but comfortable enough. I was alone, working on my laptop late that first night when the TV suddenly turned on by itself. I hadn't even touched the remote. It was still on the coffee table. Before I could get up to check it, I realized what was playing. Golden Girls. My grandmother and I used to watch that show together all the time. It was our thing. I stood there frozen, staring at the screen. That's when it happened again. Her perfume filled the room, not just a hint, but strong, as if she had just walked past me. I felt goosebumps rise all over my body. Then, the strangest sensation. Something gently touched the top of my head, fingers lightly running through my hair. My grandmother used to do that exact thing when I'd sit on the floor by her chair watching TV. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The touch lasted maybe 5 seconds, and then it was gone. The perfume lingered for a minute or two before fading. The TV stayed on, playing the episode like nothing had happened. I checked the Airbnb listing later. There was no mention of automatic timers for the TV or anything that could explain it turning on by itself. These incidents continued, smaller but still unmistakable. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of someone in my peripheral vision, but when I turned to look, no one was there. Other times, objects in my apartment would move slightly. Nothing dramatic, just a book shifted on the shelf or a picture frame turned at a different angle. The most profound experience happened last year on the anniversary of her death. I'd kept my promise and lit a candle for her that evening. I sat quietly in my living room, looking at old photos and remembering her. After about 20 minutes, clear as day, I heard her voice say, "Thank you." It wasn't loud, more like a whisper, but it was her voice. The same tone, the same slight accent she had. I know how this sounds, but I wasn't half asleep or imagining it. I was wide awake, and I heard her. For a while, I questioned my sanity. I even went to a therapist who suggested it was my brain's way of processing grief. But I've never been one to believe in ghosts or the supernatural, and these experiences feel so real, so specific to my grandmother. Which brings me to what happened 20 minutes ago, the reason I'm finally writing this down. I was at my desk working when I got up to grab some water. When I came back, there was a photograph placed between my desk and my laptop. It was an old picture of my grandmother from when she was in her 30s, wearing a blue dress at some family gathering. The crazy thing is, my mom had been looking for this exact photo for over 3 years. It had disappeared from her album after Grandma died, and none of us could find it despite searching the entire house multiple times. I called my mom immediately, asking if she'd been by my place or if she'd found the photo and given it to someone else to return to me. She hadn't. No one in my family had. No one else has keys to my apartment, and I live alone. I'm sitting here now, staring at this photograph, trying to understand what's happening. The photo is slightly worn at the edges, exactly as I remember it from my mom's album. It's not a copy or a similar picture. It's the exact same photograph that went missing 3 years ago. I don't know what to believe anymore. Part of me wants to think there's a logical explanation for all of this, but another part feels certain that my grandmother is somehow still here, checking in on me. The perfume, the car issues at the cemetery, the TV, the voice, and now this photograph. They're all connected to her in such personal ways. Sometimes I wonder if it was those last words, her asking me to remember her and light candles for her. Maybe she's just making sure I keep that promise. Or maybe she's trying to tell me something I haven't figured out yet. All I know is that these experiences have changed how I think about death and what might come after. I'm not religious, and I've always been skeptical about ghosts or spirits. But how do I explain what's happening? These aren't vague, could-be-anything occurrences. They're specific connections to my grandmother that no one else would understand or recognize. I still light candles for her regularly. Sometimes when I do, I feel that same comforting presence. Other times, nothing happens at all. But I keep my promise to her, and maybe that's all she wanted, to be remembered, to still be part of my life somehow. I don't have answers. I'm not even sure what questions to ask. All I can say is that something is happening that I can't explain, and it's connected to my grandmother. I feel her presence, not always, but enough to know she's still with me in some way. That photograph is sitting next to me as I type this. I still have no idea how it got here, but somehow it doesn't scare me anymore. It feels like a gift, a reminder of her love that transcends whatever boundary separates us now. Story 18. I still can't explain what happened at that crappy hotel 6 years ago. I was 15 then, on a family vacation in New England with my parents and my older sister, Megan. The whole trip had been planned for months. My parents were going to visit some old friends while giving us space to be teenagers by booking us our own separate room. At the time, it seemed awesome. Freedom from parents for a few days. Now I wish we'd just stayed in their room. From the moment we checked in, something felt off about that place. It wasn't exactly a motel, but definitely not a nice hotel either. One of those budget extended stay places with kitchenettes. Our room was on the second floor at the end of a hallway that smelled like cigarettes and pine sol. When we opened the door, I remember Megan saying, "Well, this is charming," in that sarcastic voice she always uses. The room was bigger than we expected, with 2 queen beds, a small table with chairs, and this weird little kitchen area with a mini fridge, microwave, and sink. The carpet was this awful brownish color with a huge dark stain near the bathroom that I swear looked exactly like dried blood. The windows were grimy with these heavy beige curtains that didn't quite close all the way. The whole place had this feeling of being cleaned regularly, but never actually getting clean. "Welcome to Murder Hotel," Megan joked, pointing at the stain. We laughed about it, throwing our bags on the beds and claiming our spaces. I got the bed furthest from the door, closer to the window. It seemed like a good idea at the time. I've always liked sleeping next to windows, but that meant my back was to that kitchen area the whole night, which ended up really bothering me. The first day was normal. We hung out with our parents and their friends, went shopping, had dinner together. When we got back to our room around 9 that night, Megan and I stayed up watching TV and talking. I remember being really tired around 11 and telling her I was going to sleep. She wanted to stay up a bit longer to text her boyfriend, so she kept the TV on low while I turned over to face the window. I couldn't shake this weird feeling of being watched. Every time I started to drift off, I'd suddenly jerk awake, convinced someone was standing in that kitchen area staring at me. I kept telling myself I was being stupid, that it was just an unfamiliar room and my imagination running wild. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep, because that's when the nightmare started. In my dream, I was standing alone in the parking lot of the shopping center back in my hometown. It was nighttime, but the lot was empty. No cars, no people, just me standing under these flickering yellow lights. I wasn't scared at first, just confused about why I was there. Then I noticed a man standing about 20 feet away from me. He looked to be in his 40s, with greasy brown hair that hung to his shoulders and this patchy, unkempt beard. The weird thing was his clothes. They looked expensive, like really expensive. A tailored suit that seemed brand new, with shiny leather shoes. The contrast between his face and his clothes was jarring, like he'd stolen them or something. But the truly unsettling part wasn't how he looked, it was how he felt. I don't know how to explain this properly, but it was like he wasn't really a person, like his skin was just a suit that something else was wearing. I could feel this awful wrongness radiating from him, like under that skin was a cavity of slime and rot and darkness that lives in the space between the stars. I know that sounds dramatic or whatever, but that's genuinely how it felt, like he was a hole in reality. He was staring right at me, not moving, not blinking. Then, without breaking eye contact, he started walking backward toward one of the stores. I couldn't move. I wanted to run so badly, but my feet were frozen to the spot. Just as he reached the entrance to the building, something else entered my dream. From the shadows at the edges of the parking lot, these things emerged. They looked sort of like dogs, but wrong. Their bodies were too long, limbs too thin, and they were completely black. Not like black fur, but like they were made of shadows. Their eyes glowed red, and they moved in this jerky, unnatural way. The man finally turned to look at them, and that's when they attacked. They swarmed him, tearing into him with teeth that seemed too numerous and too sharp. I wanted to look away, but couldn't. I was forced to watch as they literally ripped him apart. Blood sprayed everywhere. I could feel it hot on my face. I could see his organs spilling out onto the asphalt, steaming in the cold air. The worst part was that through all this, he kept staring at me, even as they tore his face off. Those eyes stayed fixed on mine. I woke up gasping for breath around 4 in the morning. The room was freezing cold, not just cool, but actually cold, like someone had cranked the AC to maximum. The air felt heavy too, thick and oppressive, exactly like the atmosphere in my dream. Megan was asleep in her bed and the TV was off. I wanted to wake her up so badly, but I was honestly too scared to get out of my bed. I lay there for hours, staring at the ceiling, afraid to close my eyes again. When the sun finally came up, I felt this huge relief wash over me. I convinced myself it was just a nightmare, probably triggered by Megan's murder hotel joke and my own anxiety about the weird room. We spent that day with our family again, and I tried to push the dream out of my mind. I didn't tell Megan about it. I didn't want her teasing me for being scared of a stupid nightmare. But as bedtime approached, I started getting really anxious. I made excuses to stay up later, suggesting we watch another movie, anything to avoid going to sleep. Eventually, though, I had to. I was exhausted. This time I left the bathroom light on with the door cracked, giving the room a dim glow so I wouldn't be in complete darkness. It didn't help. As soon as I fell asleep, I was back in that parking lot. Same man, same creatures, same gruesome ending. I watched him die again, in exactly the same way. This time when I woke up, it was around 3 in the morning. The room was freezing again, and I swear I could smell blood. Not like the metallic scent of real blood, more like how blood smells in dreams, if that makes any sense. I was shaking so hard my teeth were chattering. I pulled the covers up to my chin and stared at the ceiling until morning, counting the water stains to keep myself awake. The third night was our last at the hotel. I was dreading sleep so much that I actually considered asking my parents if I could sleep on the floor in their room, making up some excuse about Megan snoring. But I knew they'd ask questions, and I felt stupid trying to explain that I was terrified of a recurring nightmare. So I stayed, and just like the previous nights, as soon as I fell asleep, there I was in the parking lot with that man and those shadow creatures. Exact same dream, down to the smallest detail. Exact same feeling of absolute terror. On our last morning, we were packing up our stuff when Megan suddenly said, "I'm so glad we're leaving this place. I've had the worst nightmares every night." I froze. What kind of nightmares? She shrugged, not looking up from her suitcase. Just this creepy man standing in a parking lot. My blood went cold. What did he look like? Greasy hair, beard, wearing a nice suit that didn't match the rest of him. She finally looked at me, noticing my expression. "Why? What's wrong?" My hands were shaking as I told her about my dreams. With each detail I mentioned, her face got paler. She'd had the exact same dreams about the exact same man in the exact same parking lot. The only difference was that in her dreams, there were no shadow creatures. She just watched him standing there, feeling that same sense of wrongness, that same certainty that whatever was inside him wasn't human. "But why would we have the same dream?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's not possible, right?" I didn't have an answer then, and I still don't now. We both agreed never to tell our parents. They would either think we were making it up or get freaked out themselves. We tried to joke about it as we left, calling it our shared hallucination, but neither of us thought it was funny. We've never stayed in that hotel again. Actually, I've avoided hotels in general since then, if I can help it. Megan and I have talked about it a few times over the years, trying to find some rational explanation, but we always hit a dead end. We had the exact same nightmare 3 nights in a row, about a man neither of us had ever seen before. Sometimes I still dream about that parking lot. Not often, maybe once or twice a year. The man is never there anymore, just the empty lot and those flickering yellow lights. But even in his absence, I can feel him somehow, like he's just out of sight, watching and waiting. I always wake up with that same cold, heavy feeling in the air around me. I don't know what happened in that hotel room, I don't know who that man was or why he appeared to both of us, but I know it was real, whatever it was, and I know somewhere, in some form, he's still out there. Story 19. I still can't sleep with the lights off. It's been 3 years since that night at my Uncle Pete's farm in Kansas, but every time I close my eyes in the dark, I see that thing moving through the orchard trees. I was 22 then, spending the summer helping my uncle with his small apple orchard while taking a break from college. My Aunt Martha was 7 months pregnant with their first kid, and Uncle Pete had thrown out his back earlier that season, so I offered to come help with the harvest and maintenance. They lived in this old farmhouse that had been in my uncle's family for generations. Beautiful place, really isolated, surrounded by open fields with the orchard out back. It happened in late July. The day had been brutally hot, like stick to everything, can't breathe hot. I remember working in the orchard all day, clearing fallen branches and checking for apple borers. By evening, the house felt like an oven despite all the windows being open. Everyone went to bed early that night. My aunt was exhausted from the pregnancy, and my uncle was worn out from the pain in his back. I tried to sleep too, but my room on the second floor was suffocating. Around 11:30, I gave up and went downstairs, thinking I'd get some water and maybe sit outside where it might be cooler. The kitchen was dark except for the small light above the stove. I gulped down a glass of water and decided to step out onto the back porch for some air. That decision, I wish I could take it back. I wish I had just suffered through the heat in my bedroom. The back porch faced the orchard, about 30 apple trees arranged in neat rows, stretching maybe 100 yards back to where my uncle's property met the neighbor's soybean field. There was no moon that night, but the stars were bright enough to silhouette the trees against the sky. I sat on the old wooden steps, enjoying the slight breeze. It was peaceful. Crickets chirping, occasional rustling in the tall grass from field mice or whatever, normal country sounds. I was starting to feel relaxed, maybe even sleepy enough to go back upstairs and try to rest again. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, heavy, slow, dragging footsteps coming from somewhere in the orchard. My first thought was that one of the neighbor's cows had gotten loose and wandered onto our property. It happened occasionally, and Uncle Pete was always grumbling about fixing the fence line. I stood up, straining my eyes to see into the darkness between the trees. "Hello," I called out, not too loud since I didn't want to wake the house. No response, but the footsteps stopped. I waited, listening. Nothing but crickets for maybe 30 seconds, and then the footsteps started again, different this time. Not the heavy dragging sound, but something quicker, like something on 4 legs, but heavier than a dog should be. There was a tall security light mounted on a pole near the barn, but it only threw partial illumination onto the first few trees of the orchard. The rest was shadows and darkness. I squinted, trying to make sense of the movement I was seeing at the edge of the light's reach. That's when I saw it for the first time. A tall, impossibly thin figure moving between 2 trees. My brain immediately tried to rationalize it as a person, maybe a trespasser or someone lost. But it was too tall, too thin, like someone had stretched a normal human to about 7 feet and made them half as wide. I froze, unable to call out or move. The figure stopped, and I swear to God it turned towards me. I couldn't make out any features. It was just a dark silhouette, but I knew it was looking at me. I could feel it. And then, Jesus, I still have nightmares about what happened next. The figure suddenly dropped down, but not like a person would. It bent in the middle, folding in ways a human spine simply can't. Within seconds, what had been a tall, humanoid shape was now on all 4s. It was like watching someone try to fold an accordion, but all wrong, like bones and joints weren't where they should be. There was no sound of pain, no cracking or breaking noises, just this fluid, unnatural transformation. What stood there now looked vaguely like a large dog or coyote, except it was much bigger, the size of a Great Dane at least. But something was just fundamentally wrong with how it moved. It took a step, and its legs bent at angles that made my stomach turn. It was like it didn't know how legs were supposed to work, like it was wearing a dog suit but didn't understand the mechanics. I wanted to run inside, to scream, to do anything. but I was paralyzed with fear. The thing took another awkward step forward, coming slightly closer to the edge of the light. That's when it made a sound, not a bark or a growl, but a deep, wet, snorting noise like a bull about to charge. That sound broke my trance. I scrambled backward, nearly falling as I rushed to the door. I fumbled with the handle, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip it. As I finally got the door open, I risked one last glance back. The thing was closer now, maybe 20 yards from the porch. In the faint light, I could make out that its fur wasn't fur at all. It looked more like human hair, growing in patches across its body, and its face. God, its face was stretched and flattened, caught somewhere between human and animal features, with eyes that reflected the security light like mirrors. I slammed the door shut and locked it, then ran through the house, turning on every light I could find. I was hyperventilating, tears streaming down my face. I grabbed a kitchen knife and sat with my back against the refrigerator, staring at the back door until dawn broke. I must have fallen asleep at some point because I woke to my uncle shaking my shoulder, asking what the hell I was doing on the kitchen floor with all the lights on. I started to tell him what happened, but the words sounded insane even to me. I got as far as "I saw something in the orchard" before trailing off. He assumed I'd seen a coyote or maybe even a mountain lion, though they weren't common in that area, and had gotten spooked. I was about to insist, to try again to explain what I'd seen, when we heard my aunt crying out from upstairs. My uncle rushed up to their bedroom, and I followed. Aunt Martha was hunched over the toilet, violently ill. Her skin was burning hot to the touch, and she couldn't stop shaking. She kept saying she'd felt fine when she went to bed, but had woken up feeling like something was crushing her from the inside. My uncle called their doctor, who came out to the house within the hour. He couldn't figure out what was wrong. Her symptoms didn't match any normal pregnancy complication. He gave her something for the fever and nausea and told my uncle to bring her to the hospital if she got worse. I was sitting on the front porch steps when their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Keene, came by to drop off some mail that had mistakenly been delivered to her house. She noticed my uncle's truck still being there mid-morning. He normally left for work by 7, and asked if everything was okay. I explained about my aunt being sick, and then, without really thinking about it, I mentioned that I'd seen something strange in the orchard the night before. Mrs. Keene's reaction still haunts me. Her face went completely pale, and she crossed herself, something I'd never seen her do before. "Something walked through your orchard last night," she said, not as a question but as a statement, like she already knew. I described what I'd seen, the tall figure, the unnatural way it had transformed, the wrong-looking animal it had become. As I spoke, Mrs. Keene's eyes grew wider, and her hand clutched at the small cross hanging from her necklace. "My grandmother used to talk about it," she said in a hushed voice. "Called it the walker between shapes. Said it comes around every few decades, always during the hottest part of summer, always near pregnant women or newborns." I asked her what it wanted, and she just shook her head. "Nothing good," was all she would say. She insisted on coming inside to see my aunt. When she left an hour later, she pressed a small pouch of something that smelled like dried herbs into my hand and told me to put it under my aunt's pillow. I did, not knowing what else to do. My aunt's condition improved gradually over the next 3 days. The doctor called it a severe case of food poisoning, though none of the rest of us had gotten sick eating the same meals. I never told my uncle or aunt the full story of what I saw or about Mrs. Keene's reaction. What would be the point? My aunt recovered, and she delivered a healthy baby boy 2 months later. Everything turned out fine, except I can't forget what I saw. That thing in the orchard that couldn't decide what it wanted to be, human, animal, or something else entirely. The way it moved like it was learning how to use its body for the first time. The inhuman stare it fixed on me. I finished out the summer at my uncle's farm, but I never went outside after dark again without every light I could turn on. I slept with a baseball bat beside my bed and salt lines at my window, something Mrs. Keene had suggested, though she wouldn't explain why. I've been back to visit several times since then, but I always make excuses to leave before sunset. My aunt and uncle think I'm just a city kid who got spooked by normal country wildlife. My cousin is 3 now, healthy and normal in every way. But sometimes, when I call my aunt and she puts him on the phone, I hear something in his laughter that makes my skin crawl, something that reminds me of that wet, snorting sound from the orchard. And I wonder if whatever walked through those trees that night left something behind after all. Story 20. I've never been the type to believe in ghosts or anything supernatural. I mean, I enjoy a good horror movie as much as the next person, but I've always been pretty grounded in reality. That changed last December, and I still get goosebumps just thinking about it. I live in this old farmhouse about 15 minutes outside of a small town in Kentucky. It's been in my family for generations. My grandparents lived here before me, and my mom grew up here. The house is pushing 100 years old, with all the quirks that come with age. Creaky floorboards, drafty windows, and pipes that groan when it gets cold. But it's home, and I've always felt safe here. My only roommate is my cat Juniper, a chunky orange tabby I rescued from the shelter 4 years ago. She's the definition of a lazy cat. Her favorite activities include napping in sunbeams, demanding treats, and occasionally batting at a toy if I literally place it in front of her face. She's about as threatening as a marshmallow and gets spooked by the vacuum cleaner. Not exactly a guard cat. It happened 3 days after Christmas. The holidays had been quiet, just me and my parents for Christmas dinner, then back to my normal routine. That night, I was up late scrolling through Netflix, trying to find something to watch. It was freezing outside, one of those bitter Kentucky winter nights where the temperature dips into the teens and the wind whistles around the eaves of the house. I had the heat cranked up, a thick blanket around my shoulders, and Juniper was sprawled across my lap, purring contentedly. The clock on my phone read 11:45 when it started. Juniper's head suddenly shot up, ears perked forward, her whole body tensed. Before I could react, she launched herself off my lap, claws digging in painfully as she pushed off, and bolted across the living room. I yelped in surprise, more startled by her behavior than the scratch. "Junie, what the heck?" She stopped dead in the doorway that leads to the kitchen, her body language completely transformed. Her tail had puffed up to twice its normal size, and she was standing rigid, staring toward the back door that opens onto the porch. Then she started making this sound I'd never heard from her before. Not a normal cat meow or even a hiss, but a deep, continuous growl that raised the hair on my arms. My first thought was that maybe a raccoon or possum was on the back porch. We get them sometimes, especially in winter when they're looking for food. I put my laptop aside and walked to the kitchen, flipping on the light as I went. "It's okay, Uni. Probably just a critter." But when I peered through the window in the back door, there was nothing there. Just the wooden porch with a thin layer of snow, my yard beyond it, all glittering under the porch light. No animals, no movement, nothing that should have Juniper acting like she'd seen a mountain lion. I turned back to look at her, confused. She hadn't moved from the doorway, but her eyes were darting around the kitchen now, tracking something I couldn't see. Her growl had gone quieter but was still rumbling from deep in her chest. Then her head whipped toward the corner by the refrigerator, then to the window over the sink, then back to the door, like she was following the movement of something circling the room. "There's nothing there, silly," I said, but my voice sounded thin even to my own ears. Something about her behavior had my skin crawling. I checked the back door again to make sure it was locked, then the windows, all secure. The night outside was perfectly still. No wind, no animals, just darkness and the white yard stretching out to the tree line. Juniper suddenly let out a violent hiss that made me jump. When I turned, she had moved into the kitchen, her back arched impossibly high, fur standing on end, and her claws extended. She was backed against the island, facing the corner by the pantry door, looking more feral than I'd ever seen my pampered house cat. "Junie, stop it. You're freaking me out," I said, trying to sound firm, but hearing the tremor in my voice. The temperature in the kitchen seemed to drop suddenly. I could see my breath fogging in front of my face, even though the heat was running. The overhead light flickered once, twice. Juniper's eyes were fixed on that empty corner, unblinking, her tail lashing back and forth. I stood frozen, my eyes darting between my cat and the empty space she was staring at. The rational part of my brain said there was nothing there, but a deeper, primal part was screaming that something was very wrong. I could feel pressure building in the room, like the heaviness in the air before a thunderstorm. And then I smelled it. A metallic scent, like rusty water or old pennies. It filled the kitchen suddenly, making my stomach turn. I've never been able to stand that smell since I was a kid and fell into a drainage ditch, cutting my hand on a piece of old metal. The scent of blood and rust has always made me nauseous. Juniper backed up further, bumping into my legs. I reached down automatically to pick her up, needing the comfort as much as she seemed to. As soon as my hands touched her, she let out another hiss. Not at me, but at whatever she was seeing, and then scrambled up my body like I was a tree, her claws digging through my sweatshirt. She perched on my shoulder, pressing herself against my neck, her whole body vibrating with fear. The light flickered again and the smell grew stronger. I stumbled backward out of the kitchen, heart pounding so hard I could hear it. Juniper stayed clinging to me, her growl continuous in my ear. I retreated to my bedroom, slammed the door shut, and sat on the edge of my bed, breathing hard. Juniper jumped down and immediately positioned herself at the foot of the bed, facing the closed door. Her ears were flat against her head, tail still puffed. I reached for my phone, not sure who I was going to call or what I would say. It was after midnight now, and what would I tell anyone? My cat is acting weird and I smell rust. The worst part was that feeling of being watched. Even with the door closed, I could feel something, a pressure, an awareness, like when you know someone's staring at you from across a room, except there was no one there. After about 15 minutes, Juniper's posture changed slightly. She was still alert, but less terrified. She moved up the bed to sit beside me, though her eyes remained fixed on the door. Gradually, the metallic smell faded, and the room felt less frigid. I don't know how long we sat there. I was too scared to check the time or look away from the door. Eventually, exhaustion started to win out over fear. I scooted back against my headboard, pulling the blankets up around me, but I didn't dare turn off the light or close my eyes. Sometime later, it must have been around 3 in the morning, Juniper suddenly jumped and whipped her head toward the ceiling. I followed her gaze but saw nothing, just my plain white ceiling with the light fixture in the center. But Juniper was tracking something, her eyes moving slowly across the ceiling like she was watching someone walk above us. The thing is, there's nothing above my bedroom, no attic, no second floor, just the roof. But Juniper's eyes followed whatever it was from one side of the room to the other, her body tense but no longer growling. The air grew heavy again, not cold this time, but dense, like it was harder to breathe. The metallic smell returned, fainter but definitely there. I pulled the blankets tighter around me, my heart racing again. And then, the weirdest thing, I felt a slight pressure on the mattress at the foot of my bed, like someone sitting down. The blanket tugged slightly, as if caught on something. Juniper's eyes snapped to that spot, and she let out a soft, warning growl. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I stared at the empty space at the end of my bed where the blanket was slightly depressed. There was nothing there, nothing I could see, but Juniper saw it, and I could feel it. The pressure remained for maybe 30 seconds, then released. The blanket smoothed out. Juniper's eyes followed something moving away from the bed, toward the door. Then she relaxed, just slightly, her fur beginning to lie flat again. I must have fallen asleep at some point from pure exhaustion. When I woke up, sunlight was streaming through my window, and Juniper was curled at my side, sleeping peacefully. She looked completely normal, no sign of the terrified cat from the night before. I got up cautiously and opened my bedroom door. The house was quiet, warm, and smelled like it always did. Just my coffee from the day before and the lingering scent of the pine candle I'd burned. I checked the kitchen. Nothing out of place, no lingering metallic smell. It was as if nothing had happened. Juniper woke up, stretched, and padded into the kitchen, meowing for her breakfast like it was any other day. She ate normally, groomed herself, then curled up in her favorite sunny spot on the couch. If cats could shrug, that's what she seemed to be doing, completely unbothered. I've gone over that night 1,000 times in my head, looked for rational explanations, a wild animal outside, a gas leak causing hallucinations, though a carbon monoxide check showed nothing, sleep deprivation, stress. But none of it explains what Juniper saw or what I felt. I didn't tell anyone for weeks. How do you explain something like that without sounding crazy? Finally, I mentioned it to my mom, who grew up in this house. She got quiet, then told me that my grandmother used to talk about feeling watched sometimes, especially in the kitchen. She'd always brushed it off as my grandmother being superstitious. That was 4 months ago now. Nothing like it has happened since. Juniper is back to being her lazy, cuddly self. But I notice she doesn't go in the kitchen alone at night anymore, and sometimes she'll suddenly look up at nothing, staring intently for a few seconds before going back to whatever she was doing. As for me, I still live here. It's my home, and one unexplainable night isn't enough to make me leave. But now, when I wake up at 3 in the morning, I reach for Juniper first thing, making sure she's calm and breathing evenly, and I listen, really listen, to the sounds of my old house, dreading the moment I might hear her start to growl again. Story 21. I've been debating whether to share this for months. It feels like exposing something intensely private, but I need to get this out there. Maybe someone can help make sense of what's been happening to my family for nearly 40 years now. I was born in 2005, but our family's nightmare started long before I came along. The first incident happened in 1985 in our trailer home in Broomfield, Colorado. My Uncle Ryan was 10 years old at the time. According to my grandma, who just passed away 3 months ago, Ryan started talking about a 3-fingered lady who would speak to him from his closet at night. At first, everyone thought it was just typical kid stuff, an active imagination or nightmares. But then came the night that changed everything. My grandma told me this story so many times I feel like I was there myself. She heard Ryan screaming from his bedroom around 3 in the morning. When she rushed in, he was huddled in the corner of his bed, hysterical, with blood soaking through his pajama pants. When they pulled up his pant leg, there were 3 long, deep scratches running from his knee almost to his ankle. They were perfectly parallel, like claw marks. Ryan was sobbing, saying, "She tried to pull me to hell. She tried to pull me to hell." He said the 3-fingered lady had grabbed his leg and was trying to drag him off the bed and into the closet. He kicked and fought until she let go. The weird part, those scars never fully healed. I've seen them myself. 3 perfectly straight lines that still look angry and red after all these years. Uncle Ryan refuses to talk about that night now. He gets this distant look in his eyes if anyone brings it up. He moved out as soon as he turned 18 and rarely comes back to visit. The activity seemed to die down for a while after that. But in 1990, my great-grandfather John, who lived with them at the time, experienced something that made him refuse to sleep alone in a room ever again. He woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of someone jiggling his bedroom doorknob. Then he heard his wife's voice on the other side saying, "John, let me in. I need to talk to you." He got up to open the door, but something felt off. The voice was slightly wrong somehow, like it was trying too hard to sound like her. He called out, "Martha!" and the jiggling stopped immediately. That's when he heard snoring, coming from right next to him in the bed. His wife had been asleep beside him the whole time. Whatever was outside the door wasn't her. He didn't open the door. Instead, he woke up my great-grandmother, and they sat in terror until morning. The next day, my great-grandfather and his brother Rick were in the hallway when they both saw a dark figure at the end of the hall. Great-grandpa John said it looked like a woman, but with something wrong about her proportions. When they walked toward it, it just vanished. After that, things calmed down again for years, but strange things would still happen. Throughout the 2000s, family members would come home to find furniture rearranged, not dramatically, just shifted a few inches from where they'd been. They'd find the kitchen cupboard standing open when everyone swore they'd been closed. Small items would go missing for days, then reappear in odd places, like finding my grandma's reading glasses inside the freezer or her favorite coffee mug buried in the soil of a houseplant. Then I was born in 2005. I was the first grandchild in the family, and according to my grandma, that's when things really ramped up. She had this saying that always gave me chills. Having grandchildren made the devil angry. Like whatever was in our house felt threatened by new life or something. The week after my parents brought me home from the hospital, every single picture frame in the house fell off the walls simultaneously. My mom swears this is true. She was alone with me in the living room when she heard crashes from all over the house. When they checked, every single framed photo had fallen. But here's the creepiest part. None of the glass was broken. It was like they'd been carefully removed and placed face down on the floor. When I was 2 in 2007, my family decided to try to get answers. My grandma, who was getting desperate after decades of this stuff, organized what she called a séance in the living room. My parents didn't want me there, so they took me to my other grandparents' house that night. Thank God they did. They set up a video camera to record whatever might happen. I've seen the footage. It starts with everyone sitting around the dining table with candles lit. About 20 minutes in, while my grandma is asking whatever is there to show itself, a deep growling sound comes from somewhere off camera. It doesn't sound human or like any animal I've ever heard. Everyone at the table freezes. Then the salt shaker in the center of the table slides about 6 inches across the surface, all by itself. You can see it clearly on the video. No strings, no one touching it. Just moving on its own. After that, my Uncle Dan bolts from the table and the camera gets knocked over. The last thing you see is the ceiling, and you can hear everyone freaking out in the background. After that night, things got even worse. The crosses that hung in most rooms of our house, my grandma was really religious, would constantly fall off the walls. People would feel something climb onto their backs while they were in bed, a pressure like someone sitting on them. My mom said it happened to her a few times, and she couldn't move or scream when it was happening. Objects would move while you were looking right at them. My Aunt Teresa saw a coffee cup slide across the kitchen counter once and shatter on the floor. No one was near it. My cousin Megan was taking a shower when she said the shower curtain suddenly wrapped around her like someone was pulling it. She ran out of the bathroom soaking wet and refused to shower in that bathroom again. I never saw anything overtly sinister myself, which is weird considering everyone else in the family has. But I've had my own experiences. I've had nightmares my whole life, but only when I sleep in that house. I could go on vacation, sleep fine for 2 weeks, then have terrifying dreams the first night back home. Always the same dream. I'm in a long hallway, and at the end is a woman with her back to me. She's wearing a long dress, and when she turns around, her face is just wrong. Distorted, and her hands only have 3 fingers each. I never told anyone about these dreams until I was 13, because I didn't want to scare my parents. When I finally described the woman to my grandma, she went white as a sheet. She'd never told me about the 3-fingered lady from Uncle Ryan's childhood. How would I know about that? The activity seemed to focus on certain people more than others. My grandma was definitely a target. Things would go missing from right beside her. She'd feel cold spots following her around the house. Once, while she was cooking dinner, every single cabinet door in the kitchen flew open at once and then slammed shut. She was alone in the house at the time. My grandma refused to die in that house. When she got sick last year, she made my mom promise to take her to a hospice facility. She said she was afraid of giving it power if she died there. Those were her exact words. She passed away 3 months ago, and at her funeral, my Uncle Ryan finally talked to me about his experience as a kid. He said, "Whatever's in that house has been waiting for her to leave for a long time. Be careful now." Since Grandma died, things have gotten different. Not better, just different. The activity isn't as frequent, but when it happens, it's more intense. Last month, my dad found all the kitchen knives arranged in a perfect circle on the living room floor one morning. No one had been in that room all night. 2 weeks ago, I was home alone doing homework when I heard someone whisper my name right behind me. It sounded exactly like my grandma's voice. When I turned around, no one was there, but the room suddenly got so cold I could see my breath. Yesterday, I found a photo of my grandma that had been in storage. Someone had scratched out her eyes with something sharp. Everyone denies doing it. We've had the house blessed 3 times. We've had paranormal investigators come. They caught EVPs of what sounds like a woman crying. We've tried sage, salt lines, prayers, everything. Nothing helps for long. I'm 18 now, and I'm moving out for college next month. Part of me feels guilty for leaving my parents alone in that house, but I need to get away from it. I've lived my entire life under the shadow of whatever this thing is. My mom wants to move, but my dad refuses. He says it's just old house noises and overactive imaginations. He doesn't believe, even after all he's seen, or maybe he's just scared to acknowledge it. The trailer has been paid off for years, and they can't afford a new place anyway. I don't know what's in our house. I don't know why it's been tormenting my family for nearly 40 years. All I know is that when I look at the 3 scars on my Uncle Ryan's leg, I can't explain them away. And when I dream of the 3-fingered lady, it doesn't feel like a dream. It feels like she's waiting for me. Story 22. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened to me back in June of 2020. I've always considered myself a pretty rational guy. Never believed in ghosts or anything supernatural. I was the guy who'd laugh during horror movies and explain away hauntings with logic. But what happened that night in Devil's Tunnel changed something in me. I've spent almost 3 years trying to make sense of it, and I still can't. It was around 1 a.m. on a Tuesday in mid-June. The summer night was warm, but not too hot. Typical for Provo that time of year. I was driving home after hanging out with some friends, taking the route that crosses over Devil's Tunnel. It's this underground passageway that goes beneath the road, mainly used as a walking trail during the day. Most locals just know it as a shortcut, but it's got this creepy nickname because of all the graffiti and weird stories associated with it. As I was driving across the bridge over the tunnel, something caught my eye. I slowed down, thinking I was just tired, but no. I clearly saw what looked like a black and white cat falling off the bridge, dropping down toward the tunnel entrance about 20 feet below. It was the weirdest thing because it almost looked like the cat jumped deliberately, which made no sense. What cat would just leap off a bridge? I remember thinking, that poor thing must be hurt, and immediately felt this responsibility to check on it. I know it sounds stupid to go looking for a possibly injured cat at 1 a.m., but I couldn't just drive away knowing it might be suffering. So I drove a little further and parked near the elementary school that's by the tunnel entrance. The night was dead quiet, that kind of silence that makes every little sound seem amplified. The only light came from some distant street lamps and the half moon above. I grabbed my phone to use as a flashlight and made my way down the steep hill toward the tunnel entrance. The descent was trickier than I expected. The hill is really steep, and in the dark, I kept slipping on loose dirt and pebbles. My heart was already beating faster than normal, partly from the physical effort, but also from this growing uneasiness I couldn't shake off. Something felt off, but I chalked it up to being alone in a sketchy area at night. The tunnel itself is maybe 30 feet long, concrete and covered with graffiti. During the day it's just a passageway, but at night with shadows playing on the walls and the echoing of your own footsteps, it transforms into something much more sinister. The tunnel opens up to a dirt path that continues through an open field before connecting to another neighborhood. When I reached the bottom of the hill, I swept my phone light across the ground, looking for the cat. Nothing. I called out softly, "Here, kitty," feeling a bit ridiculous but hoping it might respond if it was hiding nearby. Still nothing. I entered the tunnel, the beam of my flashlight bouncing off the concrete walls. The graffiti, mostly tags and crude drawings, seemed to shift and move in the limited light, creating weird, distorted shapes. I searched the entire tunnel, checking behind every rock and in every corner where a hurt animal might hide. I even looked up at the ceiling, thinking maybe it had somehow climbed up there, though that seemed impossible. After finding nothing in the tunnel, I walked out the other side and scanned the open area beyond. Still no sign of a cat, injured or otherwise. After about 15 minutes of searching, I gave up. Maybe the cat had run off, or maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. It was late, I was tired, and my imagination could have been playing tricks on me. I decided to head back to my car. I was about halfway up the hill, still using my phone as a flashlight to navigate the steep incline, when I noticed an extremely bright light coming from the far end of the trail beyond the tunnel. At first, I thought it might be another car on some distant road, but the light was moving toward me along the path, not following any road I knew of. As the light grew closer, I could hear the distinct sound of bicycle wheels on dirt and gravel. The sound was so normal, so everyday, that some of my nervousness faded. Just another person out late, I thought, though I couldn't imagine why anyone would be biking on this trail at 1 in the morning. The figure emerged from the darkness, illuminated by what I now saw was an incredibly bright bicycle headlight. It was a young woman, probably around my age, 20 or 21. What immediately struck me as odd was her outfit. She was wearing this floral print dress that looked straight out of the 60s, with no shoes, just bare feet on the bike pedals. Her hair was long and fell partly across her cheeks, and despite the warm night, her skin looked almost unnaturally pale in the harsh light of her bike lamp. We made eye contact as she approached, and she slowed her bike to a stop a few feet away from me. There was nothing overtly threatening about her presence, yet something about the whole situation felt deeply wrong. Why was she dressed like that? Who rides a bike barefoot in the middle of the night? "Hey," she said, her voice surprisingly normal and friendly. "What are you doing out here so late?" I hesitated before answering. My mouth felt dry. "I saw a cat fall from the bridge," I explained, pointing up toward the road. "I was worried it might be hurt. It was black and white, kind of like a tuxedo cat. Have you seen anything like that around here?" She tilted her head slightly, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "No, I haven't seen any black and white cats around here lately." Then she smiled, adding, "I used to have a cat named Sylvester, though. He was black and white, smart little thing. Could even open doors on his own." My blood ran cold. 2 weeks earlier, my brother had adopted a black and white cat from the shelter. He'd named it Sylvester because of its coloring, and just yesterday, he'd called me, laughing about how the cat had figured out how to open his bedroom door by jumping up and hanging on the handle. It was such a specific detail that the coincidence seemed impossible. That's weird," I stammered. "My brother just got a cat named Sylvester, black and white too." She smiled again, but didn't seem surprised by the coincidence. Cats are mysterious creatures, aren't they? They always seem to know things we don't. We chatted for maybe another minute. Nothing substantial, just awkward small talk. She never introduced herself, and I didn't offer my name either. There was something about her manner that felt both completely normal and deeply unsettling at the same time, like talking to someone who's doing a really good impression of being human but getting tiny details wrong. Eventually, I said I should probably get going, and she nodded, saying she should continue her ride. I started walking up the hill toward my car, glancing back once to see her pushing off on her bike, the bright light illuminating the path ahead of her. When I reached my car, something made me look back down toward the trail. The woman and her bicycle, and more noticeably, her bright headlight, should have been clearly visible in the open area beyond the tunnel, but there was nothing there. No light, no movement, just darkness. I stood there for several minutes, staring down at the trail, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, or rather, what I wasn't seeing. She couldn't have gone through the tunnel again. I would have seen her light and heard her approach. The only other direction was further along the open trail, but that area was completely exposed. There was nowhere for her to disappear to, no side paths or hiding spots. especially with that bright light. It was as if she had simply vanished. My heart was pounding now, adrenaline flooding my system. I got in my car quickly, locked the doors, and sat there for a moment trying to calm down. I told myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe she'd turned off her light for some reason. Maybe there was another path I didn't know about. Maybe I just hadn't been paying close enough attention. But none of those explanations felt right, and I couldn't shake the Sylvester connection. How could she have known about my brother's cat, the exact same name, the exact same ability to open doors? The drive home was a blur. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see a bright bicycle light following me. When I got home, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the encounter in my head, trying to find some rational explanation. The next day, I did some research on Devil's Tunnel. I found a few stories about strange sightings and weird experiences people had there, but nothing about a woman on a bicycle. I even drove back during daylight and walked the entire trail again. Everything looked so normal, so ordinary. Just a concrete tunnel under a road, a dirt path through an open field, no mysterious woman, no black and white cat. I've tried to convince myself that it was just a strange coincidence, that maybe she was just some eccentric local who likes midnight bike rides in vintage clothes, that somehow, through some bizarre chance, she happened to have a cat similar to my brother's, that she found some turn-off on the path I didn't notice. But deep down, I know that's not what happened. Whatever I encountered that night wasn't natural. I don't know if it was a ghost or something else entirely, but I'm certain it wasn't just an ordinary person out for a late-night ride. I haven't gone back to Devil's Tunnel at night since then, and I find myself watching cats differently now, wondering what they know that we don't. Sometimes I still have dreams about her, the pale girl in the floral dress, riding her bicycle to nowhere, speaking about things she couldn't possibly know. I still don't have an explanation for what happened that night, but I no longer laugh at ghost stories, and whenever I drive over that bridge, I never look down.